Tonight, we're uncovering the complete history of Dragonstone. This topic gives us a lot to trace through, but I'll keep the delivery calm enough for a quiet night. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. In the year 126, before Aegon's conquest, a young Valyrian woman named Daenys Targaryen dreamed that the freehold would be destroyed. Her father, Rhaenyra Targaryen, believed her. While the dragon lords of Valyria ruled from the center of a vast and glittering empire, Rhaenyra gathered his household, his wealth, and 5 dragons, then sailed west to a lonely volcanic island at the edge of the known world. That island was Dragonstone. It stood in Blackwater Bay, northeast of Driftmark, and south of Crackclaw Point, watching over the narrow sea road that would one day lead toward King's Landing. Beneath its black cliffs, slept, and sometimes stirred, the volcanic mountain called Dragonmont. Its heat ran through the earth. Steam rose from cracks in the stone. Even long before the Targaryens arrived, the island had an ancient and unsettled feeling. The children of the forest are said to have lived there in the Dawn Age, leaving behind a history so old that even the later kings could only guess at its shape. To the proud families of Valyria, Rhaenyra's departure seemed cowardly. Dragonstone was far from the freehold's great roads, far from its palaces, slave cities, and dragon lord courts. It was a remote western outpost, useful perhaps, but hardly glorious. Yet 12 years after Daenys dreamed of fire, the doom came. Valyria broke beneath ash, flame, and the violence of the earth. The great dragonlord families vanished with their cities. The empire that had ruled much of the world was gone in a single catastrophe. Far away on Dragonstone, House Targaryen survived. For a century, the Targaryens remained on their harsh island refuge. Their surviving dragons nested among the smoking slopes of Dragonmont. Their ships crossed Blackwater Bay and the narrow sea. Their castle rose in dark, twisted forms, its towers carved and shaped like dragons crouching over the cliffs. Dragonstone did not resemble the clean white castles of later Westerosi kings. It felt older than them, stranger than them, as though the stone itself still remembered Valyria. Then came Aegon Targaryen, born on Dragonstone, and raised beneath the shadow of the volcano. In the year 2 before the conquest, he sailed from this island with his sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys. They did not arrive in Westeros as wandering exiles. They came with 3 dragons, Balerion the Black Dread, Vhagar, and Meraxes. From Dragonstone, the conquest began quietly enough, with a landing on the mainland and the first submission of nearby lords. But the island remained the place from which Aegon's claim had first taken flight. After the 7 kingdoms were united, he built his new capital at King's Landing, on the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. Dragonstone remained behind him, close enough to guard the bay, distant enough to preserve the memory of the old bloodline. In time, it became the traditional seat of the heir to the Iron Throne. The title Prince of Dragonstone carried more than land or income. It carried expectation. It belonged to the person waiting nearest to the crown, living in the ancestral home of dragons while the king ruled across the water. And for generations, the mountain kept watch over the bay, its black stone castle holding the dreams, rivalries, hatchlings, and losses of the last dragon lords in the world. Dragonstone rises from Blackwater Bay as a black, smoking sentinel between the narrow sea and Westeros. Its position guards the water route to the future site of King's Landing, a fact that would prove crucial in the centuries to follow. Long before it became a royal seat, the island's volcanic silhouette inspired fear, legends, and dragon-shaped stonework that seemed to grow from the rock itself. The mountain Dragonmont is always present, rising from the center of the island with vents that release steam and ash into the air. This volcanic activity is not ancient history, it is a living presence that shapes the island's atmosphere. The children of the forest were the first known inhabitants of Dragonstone. their time here so distant that only the land remembers. When the Valyrians arrived, they saw the strategic importance of this western outpost. They built the castle using the local stone, carving it into forms that echoed their dragons. The result is a fortress that looks like a dragon made of rock, with towers that resemble heads and wings. This architecture is a testament to the Valyrian skill in working stone and their love for dragon imagery. Every ruler who held Dragonstone inherited both a fortress and a warning from the fire beneath it. The volcano could erupt without warning, a reminder of the destructive power that the Targaryens commanded. This warning was written into the very landscape of Dragonstone, a constant reminder to those who lived there. With the rise of the Targaryen dynasty, Dragonstone became the seat of the heir to the Iron Throne. The Prince of Dragonstone was a title that carried the weight of the island's legacy, connecting the next generation to the family's origins and their destiny. The island stood as a bridge between the old world of Valyria and the new world of the Seven Kingdoms. From its shores, the dragons took flight over Blackwater Bay, and in its depths, the family's power was sustained through the centuries. The watch kept by Dragonstone over the sea, approaches to King's Landing, would continue through the reigns of kings and the births of heirs. Its volcanic fires a constant reminder of the forces that shaped its history. Yet Dragonstone was never merely a symbol of inheritance. It was a working stronghold, isolated enough to protect a royal family in danger and close enough to threaten the capital when its loyalty changed. Its harbours sheltered fleets, while its high cliffs gave lookouts a clear view across the bay. Any ship sailing toward the Blackwater had to reckon with the island's presence. After the Doom destroyed Valyria, the Targaryens endured because they had already settled here. Dragonstone became the refuge from which Aegon and his sisters began their conquest of Westeros. It was from this dark island that they planned the campaigns that would unite much of the continent beneath one crown. The castle did not need to be the largest fortress in the realm. With dragons in its sky and the sea at its feet, it possessed a strength that few enemies could challenge. Aegon's painted table became one of Dragonstone's most famous treasures. Carved in the shape of Westeros, it showed mountains, rivers, forests and coastlines, but no borders. That detail revealed the conqueror's ambition. To Aegon, the divisions between the kingdoms were temporary. The land was one realm waiting to be claimed. For generations, princes and princesses lived beneath Dragonstone's carved stone dragons. Some waited patiently for the crown, while others found themselves drawn into the rivalries that haunted House Targaryen. The title Prince of Dragonstone could be an honor, but it could also be a burden. It announced who was expected to rule next, making its holder a natural target for those with different ambitions. The island saw celebrations, marriages, births and funerals, but it also witnessed betrayal. During the Dance of the Dragons, Dragonstone became a critical center of power. It was held by Rhaenyra Targaryen, whose claim to the throne rested on her father's declaration that she should succeed him. From here, she could watch the waters leading to King's Landing and prepare for the war that would tear her family apart. The castle's grim beauty suited that conflict. Dragonstone had been built by a dynasty that understood fire, conquest and blood. In the Civil War, those forces turned inward. Dragons that had once secured the family's rule became weapons used against other dragons. The island remained standing, but the dynasty that had shaped it would never be the same. Centuries later, Dragonstone again became a refuge at the end of a rebellion. When Robert Baratheon took the Iron Throne, the last surviving Targaryen children were sent across the narrow sea. Their mother, Queen Rhaenyra, had fled to Dragonstone while pregnant. There, during a fierce storm, she gave birth to Daenerys Targaryen. The child entered the world on an island of fire and smoke, surrounded by the ruins of her family's fallen power. After the Targaryens were driven away, Robert gave Dragonstone to his brother Stannis. Stannis ruled the island with discipline and severity. He recognized its military value and its importance as the traditional seat of the king's heir, but Dragonstone offered him little comfort. Its cold halls, harsh winds, and black cliffs reflected the lonely position he often occupied within his own family. Even so, the island gave Stannis a base from which he could challenge the Lannisters after the death of King Robert. Its location allowed him to gather ships and watch the capital from across the water. When his attack on King's Landing failed, Dragonstone remained the place where he returned to rebuild his strength and continue his claim. Later, Daenerys Targaryen would come home to Dragonstone after years of exile. For her, the island was not simply a fortress. It was the first land in Westeros that belonged to her family. When she stood before its gates, she returned to the birthplace of her identity, to the stone dragons of her ancestors, and to the starting point of Aegon's conquest. Her arrival brought the history of Dragonstone full circle. A Targaryen had once sailed from this island to conquer Westeros with dragons. Now another Targaryen returned from across the sea with dragons of her own. The same black walls that had watched kings rise and fall stood ready to witness another struggle for the throne. Dragonstone endures because it is more than a castle and more than an island. It is a monument to Valyria's lost power, a gateway to the capital, and a reminder that beneath the politics of crowns and armies lies an older force. Fire waits under the mountain, the sea crashes against the cliffs, and the dragons carved into the stone seem to watch every claimant who arrives believing that destiny belongs to them. Beyond its role as a sentinel guarding the narrow sea, the true identity of Dragonstone is written in fire and stone. At Dragonstone's heart stands Dragonmont, the active volcano whose heat and fumes define the island. Smoke and steam rise constantly from its peak, mingling with the grey clouds of Blackwater Bay, the black basalt of its slopes, the scorched earth, the very air thick with the smell of brimstone. All of it speaks to the immense power that lives just beneath the surface. This is no passive landscape. The island breathes, trembles, and waits. The castle was raised on volcanic rock, its foundations sunk deep into the island's bones. Beneath its walls, the true nature of the fortress is fully exposed. A labyrinth of tunnels and caverns webs the ground below, carved by eons of flowing magma and volcanic gas. These are spaces where light rarely reaches, where the sound of the sea permeates the rock itself. Natural hot springs pump warmth through the stone floors of chambers built deep in the mountain, a constant reminder of the heat that churns below. And running through it all are veins of obsidian, dragonglass, formed in the ancient fires of Dragonmont. The island bleeds black glass, a resource that would become crucial in ages no one on Dragonstone could yet foresee. The black sand beaches are laced with obsidian gravel, smooth and sharp all at once. The caves around the base of the mountain are filled with enormous crystals of this volcanic glass, a hidden wealth beneath the ground. This is no ordinary fortress. Dragonstone's dark stone was carved into twisted gargoyles, winged beasts, and grotesque dragon heads. The Valyrian masons, it is said, possessed arts and tools lost to the rest of the world. They did not build with mortar and crane in the way of the Westerosi. They shaped the stone as if it were wet clay, twisting it into forms that seemed to writhe and strain against the gravity holding them in place. Every surface is covered in a bestiary of ancient Valyria. Dragons intertwine with wyverns and manticores. Curling scrollwork that resembles whipcracks and flames runs up the columns. The great gate is flanked by two enormous hunched beasts, their eyes carved to catch the fading light, staring down all who approach. The walls are seamless, with no joint or mortar line visible anywhere. It gives the castle a sense of being a single, violent sculpture rather than a construction assembled piece by piece. Scholars and maesters who have visited Dragonstone can only guess at the techniques used to achieve such a feat. The stone does not look carved, it looks grown. The architecture seems less built than summoned from the mountain itself. It is as if the fortress grew organically from the volcanic rock, a frozen eruption of solid darkness and twisted dragon shapes. Every rampart, every tower, every merlon is a snarling creature. The black stone, twisted into impossible shapes, mirrors the restless energy of the volcano itself. The entire fortress is a statement that the Valyrian freehold did not merely occupy a place, it commanded it. The carvings are not just decorative, they serve as a kind of armor, a hostile warning to anyone who might approach without the blood of the dragon. To stand before the gates of Dragonstone is to feel very small and very far from home. There is nothing comforting about the fortress. It is a monument to power, shaped by forces that do not ask for permission. The central keep is known as the Stone Drum, a massive round tower that rises from the very heart of the castle. Its name comes from the sound the volcanic activity makes beneath its foundations, a constant, rhythmic roaring, like a giant beating a drum of stone. The chambers within the stone drum are perpetually warm, the stones sweating with the damp heat rising from the springs below. This warmth was a blessing in the long winters that sometimes gripped the island. The castle's deep cellars, some of which extend into the volcanic caverns, house the kitchens, forges and storerooms, all drawing on the mountain's endless heat. The hot springs fed baths that were said to have healing properties, a luxury for the castle's lords. Inside the stone drum, the chamber of the painted table holds one of Dragonstone's most famous features. A massive carved map of the continent of Westeros dominates the room. It is not a decoration, it is a war table, a tool of conquest, a constant reminder that this castle was built not as a refuge, but as a launching point. To live on Dragonstone is to live with a constant awareness of the mountain's power. The soil is rocky and poor, offering little to the farmer. The inhabitants have always relied on the sea for food and connection to the mainland. The fishing villages that dot the coast are small and hardy, their boats pulled up on beaches of black sand. The weather is often harsh, the salt winds cutting across the bay and rattling the shutters of the castle's narrow windows. It is an austere life, a life that forges a certain kind of character, a character attuned to patience, resilience, and the acceptance that the world can change in an instant. The small folk of Dragonstone live in the shadow of a fortress that seems to belong to another world entirely. They gather obsidian from the beaches to use as tools and arrowheads. They warm their hands on the steam that seeps from fissures in the hillsides. For the Valyrian dragonlords who raised this fortress, Dragonstone was the westernmost outpost of their empire, a foothold on a new continent, a place to watch the sunset and dream of what lay beyond the horizon. They brought with them their dragons, their stonecraft, and their ambition. The island became a breeding ground for dragons, the volcanic climate suiting them perfectly. The heat of the earth replaced the flames of the 14 flames of their homeland. The dragons grew large and strong on the island, their scales darkening to match the black stone of the castle. The bond between the Valyrians and their dragons was strengthened by the very ground they walked upon. And so the fortress stood, waiting, carved by hands that moved stone like water, warmed by the fire of the earth itself. It was a monument to an empire that believed itself eternal. But eternity is a fragile thing, and in one of the castle's highest rooms, looking out over the narrow sea, a daughter of House Targaryen would dream a dream that shattered the world. The dragons and the stone would remain, but the world they were waiting for was about to change forever. From the deep shadow of Dragonmont, a different kind of history breathes. We have considered the volcano, we have considered the stone, the foundations of the castle itself. But Dragonstone was not always a seat of dragonlords. It was not always a fortress of men. Before the Valyrians ever set foot on its black shores, before Aegon was born beneath the shadow of the mountain, the island had already witnessed ages of life and war. In the Dawn Age, the island was said to have been inhabited by the children of the forest. They were the first people of Westeros, small of stature, dark of skin, golden eyes that could see in the deep dark. They were a race utterly unlike the men who would later come to claim the land. They did not build towers of brass and stone. They carved into the living wood and the living rock. Their ancient presence ties Dragonstone to a Westeros far older than the Seven Kingdoms. Think of the deep time involved here. The walls that would later hold the sigil of the three-headed dragon sit upon a layer of history that stretches back to the Pact, back to the Age of Heroes, back to the very dawn of the world. In that distant age, the geography of the world itself was different. The Arm of Dawn connected Westeros to the continent of Essos. Dragonstone was little more than a highland on the edge of a vast peninsula. The breaking of the arm by the children, or by the great cataclysm known as the Hammer of the Waters, changed the very shape of the land. The sea rose, the currents shifted, and Dragonstone became an island. This isolation is what made it a perfect refuge. The island's remote caves and volcanic forests offered a refuge from the wars of men. When the first men came to Westeros, crossing that very land bridge before it fell, they brought bronze, and they brought war. The children, who worshipped the nameless gods of the streams and stones and trees, found themselves pushed back into the deepest, most inaccessible corners of the land. And Dragonstone, set apart from the mainland by this rising sea, its shores guarded by treacherous currents, its heart a volcano, it was a natural sanctuary, a last stronghold. Deep inside the caves of Dragonmont, cool in some places, stifling in others, lit only by the glow of distant magma or a guttering torch, the children lived for generations. They did not simply occupy the caves, they lived within them. They raised their children in the warm glow of the volcanic vents. They painted the walls with their stories. The deep galleries of the Dragonmont, the tunnels that run for miles beneath the surface, were not entirely natural. The children carved some of them, shaping the stone to their needs. They created a whole world beneath the island, a world of silence, a world of shadow, a world of watching eyes. When the first men pressed them, the children retreated deeper into the dark places of the earth. The caves of Dragonstone became not just a home, but a shelter for their very existence. The volcanic forests on the slopes above provided timber and game, while the deep caves offered safety. You can imagine the stillness of those tunnels, the absolute quiet, broken only by the distant drip of water or the rumble of the mountain itself. It was a world removed from the chaos of the surface, a world of patient shadows. They carved faces into the rock, not the weeping faces of the weirwoods, but the calm, knowing faces of the deep earth. These carvings remain, buried beneath layers of Valyrian construction. They are a reminder that every stone of Dragonstone has a memory. The obsidian of Dragonstone was their greatest tool. They mined it. They shaped it. The dragon glass that would one day arm the armies of the living against the White Walkers was first worked here, in these ancient tunnels, by small, patient hands. The war for the dawn, the war against the cold, was fought with weapons forged from this very stone. The island was a forge, a factory of death against the darkness. And when the war was won, and the long night ended, the memory of that battle settled into the stone itself. We do not know exactly how many generations of them lived here. Time in the Dawn Age is not measured in years and reigns, but in the slow growth of forests and the quiet retreat of the ice. But they were here long enough to leave their mark. Carvings that predate the Valyrian glyphs wind through the deepest parts of the mine, spirals and patterns that echo the magical wards of the first men, the language of stone and heat. If you were to walk the deepest passages of Dragonstone today, past the stone drum, down into the ancient lava tubes, you might feel the weight of that history. It is not a Valyrian weight. It is older, quieter, a memory of a time before the Doom, before the Conqueror, before the High Lords of the Seven Kingdoms ever dreamed of dragons. The deep hum of the volcano, the whisper of wind through the obsidian tunnels, the earth remembered. Other islands hold the story of the children. The Isle of Faces in the God's Eye is a sacred ground, but Dragonstone is far from the Riverlands. It was a lonely outpost of their civilization, a place of silent vigil, looking out over the sea that would one day bring the destroyers of their world. When the Valyrians finally arrived, it was not by accident. The Freehold had long known of the island. Its obsidian was of high quality, its position was strategically important, but the old tales spoke of dark magic on the island. The men of the freehold, even the dragon lords, were wary of the deep places. It was only when the power of the freehold was at its absolute zenith, when they believed no magic could stand against their dragons, that they dared to fully settle Dragonstone. When the Valyrians arrived, they found a land already steeped in old magic and older memory. The masters of the freehold were not simple conquerors. They were sorcerers. They understood blood and fire and earth. They looked at the dragon-shaped island. They felt the heat of the Dragonmont. They sensed the ancient presence of the children in the caves below. They knew this place was potent. The first Valyrians to truly build on the island were not soldiers. They were miners. They came to exploit the obsidian. What they found in the deep tunnels convinced them this was a place of profound magic. The carvings of the children, the strange heat of the volcanic vents, the way the island seemed to concentrate power. It was a place that could strengthen their blood magic. They did not drive the old spirits out. They built their fortress on top of them, using the old caves as a foundation, a root system for their own great work. The fortress was not built from nothing. It was built on a memory, a deep, tenacious, almost geological memory of the first people of Westeros. It was this power, this sleeping power beneath the stone, that a young dragon lord named Rhaenyra Targaryen would one day sense across the vastness of the narrow sea. Drawn by a daughter's dream, fleeing a doom that had not yet fallen, he looked west, and he found his new home, an island of fire and shadow, a place where the old gods still whispered in the caves, a place where the future was yet to be written, a place that had waited an entire age for them to arrive. The children of the forest had long since vanished from Dragonstone by the time the first Valyrian ship appeared on the horizon. Their ancient fires had cooled, their weirwoods had fallen, and the island had returned to a state of wild, volcanic stillness. It was simply a place of rock and smoke at the mouth of a bay, of little interest to the first men or the Andals who had carved their kingdoms along the shores of Westeros. But to the lords of the Valyrian freehold, this jagged black island represented an opportunity they could not ignore. 2 centuries before the Doom of Valyria, the freehold turned its gaze across the narrow sea. They had conquered most of the known world from their capital on the eastern continent. But Westeros remained a tempting prize, a land of rich soil, divided loyalties, and endless resources. To secure their influence, they needed a foothold, a fortress that could guard the sea lanes and project their power into this chaotic frontier. They chose Dragonstone. 2 centuries before the Doom, the Valyrian freehold established Dragonstone as its westernmost outpost. The island gave dragon lords a foothold near the rich divided lands of Westeros. From its shores, they could watch the squabbling kings of the First Men, the ambitions of the Andals, and the endless wars that consumed the continent. It was a perfect vantage point for an empire that preferred to observe and wait before it struck. The Valyrian colonists did not come empty-handed. They brought their entire world across the narrow sea. They brought their language, the High Valyrian tongue that would echo through the courts of Westeros for centuries to come. They brought their customs, their traditions of blood purity, their mastery of magic and fire. They brought slaves, thousands of them, chained in the holds of great ships, destined to carve the island into a fortress worthy of its masters. They brought their wealth, gold and silver enough, to raise a palace from living stone. And of course, they brought their dragons. The great beasts flew across the water, their wings casting shadows over the fleet below. Dragonstone became a roost for the last dragons of the Western world, a place where the old fires of Valyria could burn far from home. To shape the island, the Valyrians used their most formidable sorcery. They did not build Dragonstone the way men build. They shaped it. They took the volcanic rock of the Dragonmont and they moulded it using magic, fire, and blood. The walls were made to look like serpentine coils. The towers rose like spears or claws. and the great hall was sculpted into the gaping jaws of a dragon. Every stone seemed alive, writhing with the memory of the fire that had birthed it. The castle was not just a fortress. It was a declaration carved into the earth, a statement that Valyria had arrived and would not be moved. Dragonstone was not yet a kingdom's capital. That honor would belong to a city yet unbuilt, but it was already a strategic prize of immense value. It commanded the sea lanes into Blackwater Bay. It provided a safe harbour for the Valyrian fleet. It allowed the freehold to trade with the Westerosi lords, to gather intelligence, and to slowly, patiently extend its influence across the continent. The island was a singular possession, held by one family among the Dragon Lords, a family called Targaryen. For years, the Targaryens lived in this strange duality. They were Valyrian, yes, but they were Dragonstone Valyrian. They were the lords of the westernmost outpost, somewhat distant from the politics and the decadence of the capital in the east. They learned to look at the kingdoms of Westeros, not as enemies, but as a future. They learned the local languages, the local laws. They made marriages and alliances with the mainland. The isolation of Dragonstone forged them into a different kind of Dragon Lord, one who was perhaps a little less arrogant, a little more aware of the fragility of power. But the other Dragon Lords of Valyria saw this expedition as a side project, an eccentricity. They were consumed by their own endless rivalries, their blood magic, their insatiable hunger for conquest. They had little time for a volcanic island on the edge of the world, and so they left the Targaryens to their quiet, patient vigil. For 100 years, the family lords over this fortress, mastering its fires, breeding their dragons, watching the stars. They grew wealthy from the trade routes they controlled. They grew powerful from the 5 dragons they had brought with, but they also grew strange. The constant exposure to the volcanic fumes, the isolation of castle life, the immense power of the dragons, it all contributed to the unique identity of this house. They balanced on the edge of 2 worlds, belonging fully to neither. They did not know it yet, but their distance from the heart of the freehold was their greatest blessing. The Dragon Lords of Valyria laughed at the Targaryens for leaving their homeland. They called it an act of weakness, a retreat from the glory of the Empire. But within a few generations, a young girl in the Targaryen line would inherit a different kind of vision. A stone would fall from the sky into a fire, and in the flames, she would see the end of the world. A dream that would force the family to make a choice that ultimately decided the fate of the world. A choice that kept them out of the fires of the Doom, preserved their dragons, and left them standing alone as the last lords of dragonkind. This foothold, however, was never intended to be subtle. The Valyrian freehold did not believe in half measures. When they chose to colonize an island at the edge of the known world, they did not just build a garrison, they built a monument, a warning, a fortress that would stand as a permanent testament to their dominion over stone, over fire, and over the air itself. The fortress of Dragonstone was shaped from the earth by methods that baffled the native peoples of Westeros and have never been fully replicated since. Valyrian sorcery and craftsmanship transformed Dragonstone into a castle unlike any in Westeros. The structure was not built in the conventional sense. It was fused, grown, and shaped from solid rock. Blocks of stone were not merely stacked. They were melted together by dragonfire and bound by spells long forgotten to the maesters of the citadel. The result was an architecture of organic terror. The towers curled like claws. Its bridges resembled dragon tails, and its gates opened beneath monstrous jaws, with great stone teeth hanging overhead, a constant reminder that you were entering the mouth of a dragon. The primary keep, known as the Stone Drum, was a massive square tower without true windows, only arrow slits and ventilation shafts that howled with the island's ever-present wind. The Sea Dragon Tower jutted out from the cliffs, its stonework dripping with fused scales, appearing to dive into the churning waters below. The Windworm Tower spiraled high into the sky. To reach the castle proper, one had to cross a narrow bridge of fused stone that arched over a deep ravine. It was a gauntlet designed to shrink the spirit of any envoy or enemy. This architecture served a deeper purpose than mere beauty or comfort. The fortress was designed to impress allies and terrify enemies long before a Targaryen army crossed the sea. A lord from the Stormlands or the Reach arriving on Dragonstone for trade or diplomacy would not see a friendly welcome. He would see a landscape built by gods he did not worship, by a power he could not comprehend. The message was absolute. Westeros was a patchwork of quarrelling kingdoms. Valyria was a single unchallenged superpower, and here, at the very edge of their territory, they had raised a stronghold that could withstand any siege. It was not just a castle, it was a declaration. Dragonstone became proof that Valyria's power could take root, even at the edge of the known world, a permanent claim on a continent that had yet to be brought to heel. The island itself was the embassy of a civilization that considered itself eternal. Within the fortress walls, the Valyrian influence continued. The Great Hall was a vast chamber of twisted stone pillars and fused black walls that seemed to sweat with heat from the volcanic rock beneath. The floors were smooth, dark, and warm to the touch. Tunnels carved into the volcanic rock connected the castle to the caverns beneath the Dragonmont, where the dragons themselves were often stabled. The air inside the castle carried the ever-present scent of brimstone and sea salt. It was an environment that shaped the very soul of the family that lived there. The Targaryens grew up surrounded by this architecture. They learned to walk on floors that hummed with the heat of the earth. They learned to sleep in chambers shaped like dragons' ribs. It was no wonder that they came to view themselves as different from the men of Westeros. They were born in a fortress that was itself a creature of fire and magic. For many years, this fortress was simply a distant holding of the Valyrian freehold, a quiet outpost on a volcanic island. From the top of the stone drum, the Dragonlords of House Targaryen could look west and see the shores of the continent that would one day be their kingdom. But they did not reach for it. Not yet. The fortress of Dragonstone held them, a nest of dragons waiting for the right moment to fly. But the permanence of its stone walls was deceptive. The great civilization that had built this fortress, that had raised these towers and fused these walls, was rotting from within. The Targaryens, living in their fortress of fused stone, had no way of knowing that a threat far greater than any Westerosi army was looming on the horizon. A threat that would not come from the sea, but from the very heart of the empire that had built their home. In the depths of Dragonmont, the earth continued to stir, and within the walls of the stone drum, the Targaryens were about to face a choice that would alter their destiny forever. The fortress of stone dragons, a monument to Valyrian power, was about to serve a purpose far greater than outpost or home. It would become their sanctuary, their refuge from the storm. The stone walls that were built to project power abroad were about to become the only thing standing between the last dragon lords and total extinction. But the fortress of stone dragons was not shaped by sorcery and stone alone. It was shaped by a dream that arrived in the year 126 before the conquest. To a young woman named Daenys Targaryen, the daughter of Lord Aegon. In that year, Daenys dreamed that Valyria would be destroyed by fire and ruin, not a vague premonition, but a vision she could see in the dark of sleep. The mountains of the freehold splitting open, the towers of the dragon lords falling into molten rock, and the great empire reduced to ash and silence. Her father, Aegon Targaryen, faced a choice that no other lord in Valyria would have entertained. He chose to believe a girl's prophecy over the confidence of the world's greatest empire. He looked at the certainty of a civilization that had ruled for thousands of years, that commanded dragons without number, and he decided his daughter's nightmare was more real than all of it. That decision would make House Targaryen seem weak and cowardly to the other dragon lords. They called Aegon a fool who listened to children. They whispered that the Targaryens were abandoning the glory of the freehold for a black rock on the edge of the world. But Aegon did not waver. He gathered his family his wealth, and 5 dragons. He loaded ships and sailed west to Dragonstone, the remote outpost that had been colonized by Valyria only 2 centuries before. The other dragon lords watched him go with contempt. They believed the freehold was eternal, that no force could break its power. They had no idea that Daenys' vision was not a nightmare. It was a warning, and that warning would save the family from extinction. 12 years later, in 114 before the conquest, the doom came to Valyria. The land tore apart in a cataclysm of fire, water, and earth. The dragon lords perished in moments, their empire swallowed by the sea. Only the Targaryens remained, the last family of dragon lords alive in the world. But survival was not immediate. Of the 5 dragons Rhaenyra had brought to Dragonstone, only one would live through the journey and the years that followed. The Targaryens had escaped destruction, but they were now alone on an island that had once been a mere foothold. They spent the next century rebuilding, breeding dragons in the shadow of Dragonmont, waiting. The island where they had been mocked became their sanctuary. The fortress, shaped like dragons, became a cradle for the last living fire in the world. And Daenys, the girl whose dream had saved her bloodline, passed into legend as Daenys the Dreamer. Her vision did not simply predict the doom, it knew where to flee, and it chose a place that would one day become the launching point for a conquest far greater than Valyria had ever attempted across the sea. For nearly a century after the doom, Dragonstone was not the centre of an empire. It was a refuge. The Targaryens ruled the island and its narrow waters, maintaining the old Valyrian ways while the world around them changed. Across the sea, the free cities rose from the ruins of Valyrian control. In Westeros, 7 kingdoms fought, traded, married, and bled beneath their separate crowns. None of them yet understood that the heirs of the Dragon Lords were watching from the smoking mountain. Then came Aegon Targaryen. Aegon was born on Dragonstone, shaped by the same black stone walls that had sheltered his ancestors. He had 2 sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys, and together they possessed the greatest weapons the world had ever known. Aegon rode Balerion the Black Dread, a dragon vast enough to cast a shadow over towns and burn armies into ash. Visenya rode Vargar, fierce and ancient. Rhaenys rode Meraxes, swift and terrible. There were other dragons in the world, but no kingdom in Westeros had faced 3 such creatures united beneath one purpose. That purpose was conquest. The reasons for Aegon's invasion have never been fully known. Some said he wanted wealth. Some believed he desired the glory his ancestors had lost when Valyria fell. Others thought Dragonstone was too small for a man who had been raised among the relics of an empire. But whatever drove him, Aegon did not cross the narrow sea to raid or demand tribute. He came to make Westeros his. Before he sailed, he ordered a table carved in the shape of the continent. It showed the rivers, hills, forests, and coasts of Westeros, but it bore no borders. To Aegon, the divisions between kings were temporary things. The land was one realm waiting to be claimed. From Dragonstone, his fleet carried his soldiers to the mouth of the Blackwater rush. There, on the shore beneath 3 hills, Aegon raised a wooden fort. It was a humble beginning for a king who would forge a new dynasty, but it stood at the heart of the continent, between the rich lands of the Reach, the river kingdoms, the Stormlands, and the eastern coast. In time, that rough fort would become King's Landing. The kings of Westeros had been warned. Aegon sent ravens across the realm, demanding submission. Some laughed. Some ignored him. Others gathered armies, certain that a foreign lord on a small island could be crushed beneath the strength of the 7 kingdoms. They did not understand that the old rules of war had ended. King Harrenhal trusted in Harrenhal, the greatest castle ever built in Westeros. Its towers were massive, its walls thick, its gates made of iron. Harren believed no army could take it, but castles were built to withstand men, arrows, siege engines, and time. They were not built to withstand Balerion. Aegon flew above Harrenhal at night. Balerion's black flame poured down upon the towers, melting stone and iron together. The heat was so great that the men inside could not escape. Harren and his sons died in the castle they believed would protect them forever. When dawn came, the melted ruins stood as a warning to every lord who thought walls could save him from dragons. Not all kings chose defiance. Torrhen Stark, the king in the north, marched south with his army, but saw the fate of Harrenhal and the power gathered beneath Aegon's banners. Rather than sacrifice thousands of Northmen in a war he could not win, Torrhen bent the knee. He surrendered his crown and became the Lord of Winterfell. Some called him the King who knelt, but his choice spared the north from fire. Others fought until the end. At the Field of Fire, King Mern of the Reach and King Loren of the Rock brought a combined host against Aegon. Their armies were immense, with tens of thousands of knights and foot soldiers gathered beneath their banners. Against them stood Aegon's smaller force, supported by Visenya and Rhaenys in the sky. When the dragons descended, grasslands became infernos. Men in steel armor roasted inside their own protection. Horses bolted through smoke and flame. By the end, King Mern and much of his army had burned, while King Loren surrendered. One by one, the kingdoms changed. The Stormlands fell after Argilac the Arrogant died in battle. Dorne remained unconquered, resisting dragonfire through desert, ambush, and endurance. But the rest of the continent bowed beneath the three-headed dragon, and at the centre of it all stood Dragonstone. The island was no longer merely the place where the Targaryens had survived. It had become the first seat of a new royal house, the ancestral home from which Aegon had set out to unite the realm. Even after King's Landing became the capital, Dragonstone remained sacred to the dynasty. It was the seat granted to the heir to the Iron Throne, a title that carried the memory of exile, prophecy, fire, and conquest. Every black wall on the island told the same story. The Targaryens had come there because one girl dreamed of death. They had stayed because they were the last of their kind. And from that lonely volcanic rock, they had changed the history of Westeros forever. Rhaenyra Targaryen chose to believe a girl's prophecy over the confidence of the world's greatest empire. This single act of faith changed the course of history. It was the moment the Dragon Lords became the last Dragon Lords. Though they did not know it yet, the decision bound his entire house to exile, to caution, and to an enormous private faith in Daenys' vision. Rhaenyra Targaryen abandoned Valyria. He carried with him everything that mattered. His family, his servants, his accumulated riches. The great treasures of House Targaryen were packed into ships designed to cross the narrow sea. But the most significant cargo was living, breathing fire. 5 dragons reportedly crossed the narrow sea with the Targaryens. The great Valyrian ships slipped their moorings in the shadow of the 14 flames, the volcanoes that crowned the capital. They were sailing not towards conquest, but away from annihilation. They were leaving the heart of the world for a volcanic outpost on its very edge. The journey across the narrow sea was long and uncertain. They were leaving the only world they had ever known, guided by nothing but a dream and the flight of their dragons. The ships carried not just people, but the entire weight of a noble house. Scrolls, furniture, weapons, and gold. The stone of Dragonstone rose from the sea, a dark silhouette against the horizon. It was a stark volcanic rock, nothing like the grand towers of Valyria, but it was safe. It was theirs. Dragonstone became a refuge for a house that had walked away from the centre of the world. To the other Dragon Lords, this migration from the capital looked like cowardice. It looked like weakness. But the Targaryens understood that they were trading the illusion of security for actual survival. The migration was an act of exile, caution, and enormous private faith in Daenys' vision. It was a gamble of the highest order, staking the future of an ancient dynasty on the dream of a single child. 12 years passed. The Doom of Valyria came in 114 before the conquest. It was a cataclysm so vast that it shattered the peninsula, unleashed the full fury of the 14 flames, and boiled the surrounding sea. In a single day, the greatest civilization the world had ever known was erased from existence. Every dragon lord in Valyria perished. Every dragon in the freehold the winged mounts of the most powerful sorcerers in history, was lost in the fire and the fall. Only the 5 dragons that Aegon had taken to Dragonstone survived. The Targaryens were the only family of dragon lords left in the world. When word of the doom reached Dragonstone, it was not a day of sorrow alone. It was a day of profound, unsettling realization. The Targaryens were the last. The dragons that flew over Dragonstone were the last dragons in the world. The power that had been shared by 40 families was now concentrated in one, but so was the danger. If they had stayed, they would be ash. Now they were the sole inheritors of the legacy of the freehold. The weight of that inheritance pressed down on them just as heavily as volcanic stone. They had to be cautious. They had to be patient. The world could not know how diminished they truly were in numbers, or how desperately they needed to build their strength. But survival on Dragonstone was not immediate dominance. Of the 5 dragons that crossed the sea, only one was initially accounted for in the years following the doom. The volcanic island of Dragonmont could sustain a dragon, but rebuilding a dragon-riding culture from the ground up required patience. For a century, the Targaryens kept to themselves. They bred their dragons in the volcanic cradle of Dragonmont, allowing the fire of the island to sustain the fire of their beasts. The heat of the mountain warmed their eggs. The obsidian beneath their feet, the dragonglass, remembered the fire of the earth. Dragonstone was no longer just a Valyrian outpost. It was the last bastion of a fallen world. The castle's dark architecture, carved in the image of the dragons they loved, became the centre of their universe. The tunnels beneath the castle were filled with the potential for rebirth. The Targaryens began to look less like exiles and more like a seed planted in foreign soil. They looked west, towards the divided continent of Westeros. They had seen the power of dragons in Valyria. They knew what unity enforced by fire and blood could look like. They grew strong in their isolation, but they did not remain isolated forever. Dragonstone sat at the entrance to Blackwater Bay, a natural fortress looking west. The Targaryens watched the wars of the 7 kingdoms from their high perch. They learned the politics of the mainland. They intermarried with the Velaryons of Driftmark, the sea snakes of the Narrow Sea. Generations passed. The memory of Valyria faded, replaced by the reality of Dragonstone. The castle held them, protected them, and shaped them. They became less Valyrian and more something else, something forged in the isolation of the Narrow Sea. And in time, from this foundation of volcanic rock and preserved dragonfire, the seeds of a conquest would begin to stir on the island. For 12 years, silence settled over Dragonstone like ash before a fire. The other dragon lords of Valyria called Aegon a coward. They said he had run from shadows, that he had ruined his house for the nightmare of a girl. But Aegon did not care. He had seen the fear in Daenys' eyes, and he knew that fear was real. He spent those 12 years fortifying his lonely island, unloading ships, settling his family into the black stone fortress beneath the Dragonmont. The freehold went on with its wars and its feasts, its endless schemes, utterly certain that it would last forever. 12 years after Aenar's departure, the 14 flames erupted and Valyria was consumed. It was not a disaster that unfolded slowly, giving the Dragon Lords time to flee or to fight. It was a judgment that arrived in an instant. The entire peninsula shattered. The 14 flames did not simply erupt. They tore the land apart from beneath. Cities vanished, Dragon Lords died, and the empire that had ruled half the world broke apart in a single cataclysm. The sea rushed in to meet the fire, and the resulting explosion of steam and molten stone erased everything. The great capital, the heart of Valyrian civilization, simply ceased to exist. Dragons fell from the sky, spells unraveled, streets melted. Thousands of years of dominion were undone in hours, and across the Narrow Sea, on the battlements of a black stone castle, the Targaryens watched the eastern sky burn. The Targaryens survived only because they had fled to their lonely island fortress. They stood on the walls of Dragonstone and saw the horizon glow red for months. No word came from Valyria, no ships, No dragons. The most powerful civilization the world had ever known was gone, and House Targaryen was the only house of dragon lords left alive. Dragonstone changed overnight from a distant outpost into the last living fragment of Valyrian dragon lord power. Aegon had not simply saved his family. He had saved the last dragons. He had saved the last Valyrian steel. He had saved the last bloodlines that could bind a dragon to a rider. It was an accident of history, a gamble that had paid off not through force, but through a young girl's dream. But survival was not the same as strength. Of the 5 dragons Aegon brought with him across the narrow sea, only one was truly fit for war. The others were young or sickly, or they had not taken well to the cold volcanic air of Dragonstone. The Targaryens spent the next 100 years doing something that Valyria had rarely done. They waited. They did not try to reclaim the empire. They did not march back into Essos to claim the ruins. They stayed on their island. They bred their dragons slowly. They married brother to sister to keep the bloodline pure. They guarded their remaining spells and their ancient texts. They became the quiet inheritors of a broken world. Westeros, for its part, barely noticed. The kingdoms of the West had always been a distant periphery to the Valyrian freehold, valuable for trade but never truly conquered. With Valyria gone, the lords of Westeros turned inward. They fought their own wars. They built their own kingdoms. And on the island at the mouth of Blackwater Bay, a seed of dragonfire lay dormant. The Targaryens held onto their strength. They sharpened their swords. They raised their dragons from hatchlings to beasts the size of war galleys. They did not announce themselves, did not threaten. They simply existed, waiting for the moment when the world was ready for them. 100 years passed in that quiet preparation, and when the time finally came, it was not the Empire of Valyria that rose from the east. It was something smaller, older, and more patient. It was Dragonstone. From Dragonstone, the Targaryens looked west toward a land divided into 7 quarrelsome kingdoms. Westeros had kings in abundance but no unity. Harren the Black ruled the Riverlands from the immense new fortress of Harrenhal. Argilac the Arrogant held the Stormlands. Loren Lannister sat beneath the golden rock of Casterly Rock. Mern Gardner wore the crown of the Reach. Torrhen Stark ruled the north, and the Vale belonged to House Arryn. Across the narrow waters, Aegon Targaryen saw not an unconquerable continent, but a battlefield waiting for a single decisive blow. Aegon was not alone. At his side stood his sisters, Visenya and Rhaenys, each a dragon rider in her own right. Aegon rode Balerion the Black Dread, the greatest dragon alive, a creature old enough to remember Valyria. Visenya rode Vargar, fierce and relentless. Rhaenys rode Meraxes, silver-scaled and swift. Together, the 3 dragons carried the memory of the freehold into a land that had never known the true terror of dragonfire. The conquest began not with a great army, but with a landing. Aegon came ashore at the mouth of the Blackwater, on the very ground where King's Landing would one day rise. He raised a wooden fort, sent ravens to the kings of Westeros, and made his demand simple. Bend the knee, keep your lands and live, resist and burn. Most of the kings chose resistance. They believed numbers, walls, and old crowns would protect them. They had fought men all their lives. They did not yet understand what it meant to fight dragons. For 100 years after the Doom of Valyria, the Targaryens barely stirred from Dragonstone. They had escaped the cataclysm, but they had not escaped its shadow. The family was no longer one Dragonlord house among many, but the last of its kind. Across the narrow sea, old Valyria became a haunted ruin, a place of twisted stone and eternal fog, avoided by even the bravest sailors. In Westeros, Dragonstone waited. The island fortress, once a modest outpost, now held the entire legacy of a fallen civilization. The Targaryens spent the next century on Dragonstone, rebuilding after the destruction of their homeland. Their surviving dragons, brought from Valyria in the migrant, were cared for and bred. These dragons became the foundation of a new, smaller dynasty. Balerion, the mightiest of them, was still young, but he would grow to become a legend. Others perished or failed to thrive, but enough survived to ensure that the blood of the dragons would not be extinguished. On the slopes of the Dragonmont, eggs were laid, hatchlings emerged, and the bond between Targaryen and dragon was reforged. The castle itself became a sanctuary and a prison. Its halls echoed with the footsteps of a diminished family. They studied their ancient texts, preserved their prophecies, and maintained their traditions. They were no longer a house within an empire. They were an empire in microcosm, contained on one small island. This isolation bred a fierce sense of identity. The Targaryens were different, and they knew it. They kept aloof from the politics of Westeros, watching as the Seven Kingdoms squabbled and warred, biding their time. The century was one of silence and preparation. The ashes of Valyria had barely cooled, but on Dragonstone, the fires were carefully tended. The future was uncertain, but the past was gone. And as the years passed, the island itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when the last Dragon Lords would once again take to the sky. From the highest towers, the Targaryens watched the shores of Westeros. They studied the divided kingdoms, the shifting alliances, and the cracks in the ancient pacts. They learned the languages, the customs, the strengths and weaknesses of every great house. And within the walls of Dragonstone, a plan began to take shape. It was not yet time, but the seeds of conquest had been sown. The dragons were growing, the family was learning, and the island that had been a refuge was becoming a launching point. Aegon Targaryen was the one who would turn that possibility into reality. With his sisters, Visenya and Rhaenys, he inherited Dragonstone and the dragons that would make their ambition possible. Balerion the Black Dread carried Aegon. Vhagar bore Visenya. Meraxes flew with Rhaenys. Together, the three dragons were not merely weapons. They were the final living proof that Valyria had not truly died. At the time, Westeros was divided among rival kings. Harren the Black ruled the Riverlands from his vast new fortress at Harrenhal. King Mern of House Gardner held the Reach. Loren Lannister ruled the Westerlands. Argilac the Arrogant sat the Storm King's throne. In the Vale, House Arryn remained secure behind mountain passes. The north was governed by House Stark, and Dorne stood apart beneath its own princes. These rulers had fought one another for generations. None imagined that a small family from a volcanic island would soon demand their submission. The first step was not an invasion, but a declaration. Aegon sent envoys across the continent with a simple message. The kings of Westeros could bend the knee and keep their lands, titles, and honours beneath one king, or they could resist and face fire and blood. Some laughed at the demand, others answered with insults. Argilac Durrandon returned Aegon's offer with the severed hands of the messenger who had carried it. That answer brought war. Aegon and his sisters landed near the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, where the waters of the bay met the shore. There, on a hill above the river, they raised a wooden fort. It was a humble beginning for a kingdom, but it stood at the crossroads of the continent. From that hill, Aegon could strike north, south, east, or west. In time, the place would become King's Landing. But at first, it was only a camp surrounded by smoke, soldiers, and the shadows of dragons circling overhead. The first great castle to fall was Harrenhal. Harren the Black believed his enormous walls would protect him. He had spent years building the largest fortress ever raised in Westeros, using the wealth and labour taken from the Riverlands. Its towers were high, its gates were strong, and its walls were black stone. Harren looked upon Aegon's army and believed himself safe, but Harrenhal had never been built to withstand a dragon. As night fell, Aegon mounted Balerion and rose into the darkness. The Black Dread descended upon the castle, breathing fire so hot that stone cracked, steel ran like water, and the towers themselves began to melt. Harren and his sons died inside the fortress they had trusted. By morning, Harrenhal stood ruined, its twisted towers a warning visible for leagues in every direction. The River Lords, who had suffered beneath House Hoare, did not mourn their fallen king. They gathered before Aegon and bent the knee. Edmund Tully of Riverrun was named Lord Paramount of the Trident. In this way, Aegon showed the pattern that would define his rule. Those who resisted could be destroyed. Those who submitted could be raised higher than before. In the south, the Storm King marched to meet Orys Baratheon, Aegon's fiercest commander and oldest companion. Argilac was old, proud and unwilling to yield. He rode into battle beneath storm clouds, determined to break the invaders before they could establish themselves. Instead, he was defeated and slain. His daughter Argella briefly claimed the Stormlands, but her own men delivered her to Orys in chains. Orys freed her chains and took her hand in marriage. With that union, House Baratheon became the new ruling house of the Stormlands. Their sigil would remain the crowned stag of the Durrandons. But their blood and allegiance now belonged to the Dragon King. The greatest challenge came when King Mern and Loren Lannister joined their forces. Their combined host was immense, perhaps the largest army ever gathered in Westeros. Thousands upon thousands of knights, archers, and men-at-arms marched beneath the banners of the Lion and the Green Hand. They believed numbers would decide the war. Then Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys came together in the sky. At the Field of Fire, all three dragons attacked at once. Balerion, Vargar, and Meraxes swept over the gathered armies, turning grassland into an inferno. Men burned in armor, horses fled in terror. Banners vanished beneath smoke and flame. King Mern died with many of his heirs, and the ancient line of the Gardeners ended in a single terrible day. Loren Lannister survived. Seeing the ruin around him, he bent the knee to Aegon. Because he chose submission over death, he was allowed to remain Lord of Casterly Rock. From that day onward, he was remembered not as a king, but as Loren the Last. One by one, the old kingdoms changed. The Vale submitted when Visenya flew Vargar over the Eyrie and landed within its mountain stronghold. The young king of the Vale was presented to the Dragon Queen, and his mother chose peace. In the north, Torrhen Stark marched south with his army, prepared to defend his crown. But when he saw the dragons and understood what had happened at Harrenhal and the Field of Fire, he chose another path. Torrhen bent the knee before Aegon and surrendered his crown. His men called him the King Who Knelt. But his choice spared the north from devastation. In return, he remained Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. Aegon had gained another kingdom, without burning a single northern castle. Only Dorne refused to yield. Its rulers would not meet the dragons in open battle. They vanished into deserts, mountains, and hidden strongholds, denying Aegon an enemy he could destroy in one stroke. Rhaenys and Meraxes flew over Dorne, but fire could not force a people to submit when their armies could disappear beneath the sands. Dorne would remain unconquered for generations. Still, Aegon had done what no ruler before him had managed. 6 of the 7 kingdoms had accepted his authority. On the hill where he had first landed, he built a new capital. The wooden fort became the beginning of a city, and the city became the heart of a new realm. Aegon was crowned with a circlet of Valyrian steel, not in the ancient manner of the kings he had defeated, but as a conqueror who had forged something entirely new. And to symbolize that new order, he commanded the swords of his defeated enemies to be gathered. Valarion's dragonfire melted them together into a towering, jagged seat of steel. It was called the Iron Throne, uncomfortable by design, a reminder that ruling the 7 kingdoms was never meant to be easy. The age of scattered kings was over. The age of the Targaryen dynasty had begun. The century following the Doom was a quiet, focused era on Dragonstone. The Targaryens were no longer a great house within a vast empire. They were a single family holding the last surviving dragons in the known world. On an island, at the edge of a continent that did not yet know their name, the question that loomed over every decision made in the stone halls of their fortress was not whether they would survive, but how they would choose to grow. The answer lay directly beneath their feet. Dragonstone was a volcanic island, and the Dragonmont was an active furnace. This constant geothermal heat, coupled with the labyrinth of isolated, sea-carved caves along the coastline, created a perfect environment for dragons. The eggs required warmth and seclusion to hatch, In Valyria, they had constructed massive temples and specialized dragon pits. Here, the island itself offered everything the creatures needed. The heat from the mountain seeped into the stone, and the caves provided the darkness and solitude that nesting dragons instinctively sought. Dragonstone's volcanic heat and isolated caves made it an ideal home for dragons and their eggs. Over the generations that followed, this natural advantage became the foundation of the Targaryen resurgence. It was not a rapid expansion, but a slow and careful process. The dragons that had survived the flight from Valyria were bred. Eggs were laid in the warm sands of the Dragonmont slopes and in the deep caves facing the narrow sea. The Targaryens mastered the art of dragon riding, not just as a means of travel or war, but as a bond that defined their identity and authority. Every hatchling bound to a Targaryen rider strengthened the dynasty's claim to a power no other house in Westeros could even imagine. Over generations, the Targaryens rebuilt their strength through careful breeding and dragon riding. As the decades passed, the image of the Smoking Mountain became inseparable from the identity of the family that lived beneath it. From the shores of Crackclaw Point to the cliffs of Driftmark, sailors and fishermen could see the plume of the Dragonmont rising against the sky. It was a constant reminder that the old world was gone and something new was taking root in its place. The volcano was no longer just a geographical feature. It was a symbol of the Targaryen spirit, dormant but capable of immense, world-changing fire. The island's Smoking Mountain became inseparable from the image of Targaryen power. Slowly, the purpose of the island began to shift. The stone fortress, with its dragon-shaped towers and bridges, had been built to shelter a handful of survivors, fleeing total annihilation. It had been a refuge, a hiding place at the edge of the world. But as the dragons multiplied, the purpose of Dragonstone evolved. It was no longer a retreat, it was a staging ground. The family that had been too weak to save Valyria was quietly growing strong enough to build something entirely new. The grey stone walls no longer simply guarded a remnant of a fallen empire. They guarded the future of House Targaryen. They guarded a growing fleet, a treasury, and a stable of dragons whose number was increasing with every successful hatching. A fortress that had once sheltered survivors was becoming a launch point for conquest. The island itself, forged by fire and shaped by sorcery, was preparing for a role it had never played before. When the time came for this family to leave their refuge and inscribe their name upon the history of an entire continent, the path would begin not in the throne rooms of kings, but in the volcanic heat and shadowed caves of this single formidable island. The fortress that had once been a shelter had become the silent, waiting heart of a new world order. Across the narrow waters, Westeros remained divided among rival kings and ancient houses. The Stormlands, the Reach, the Westerlands, the Vale, the Riverlands, the North, and the Iron Islands all answered to separate rulers, each with old grudges and uncertain borders. For centuries, no single power had been able to bind the entire continent beneath one crown. To the Targaryens of Dragonstone, this division was not merely a fact of geography, it was an opportunity. Aegon Targaryen understood what his family possessed. Gold could be spent, ships could sink, armies could be defeated, but dragons transformed every calculation of war. With his sisters Visenya and Rhaenys beside him, and with Balerion Vagar and Meraxes beneath them, Aegon held a weapon unlike any Westeros had ever faced. The dragons were not simply beasts of battle, they were living proof that the power of old Valyria had not vanished completely into ash and legend. Before the conquest began, Dragonstone served as the place where plans were made and loyalties were measured. Ships gathered in its harbour, messengers crossed the narrow sea and sailed toward the coastlands of Westeros. The island was close enough to the mainland to make invasion possible, yet distant enough to remain secure from the quarrels of the kings beyond the water. Its position gave the Targaryens a bridge between the world they had lost and the realm they intended to claim. When Aegon finally sailed west, He did not leave Dragonstone behind in any meaningful sense. The island remained the source of his strength. It was where his dragons nested, where his bloodline had endured, and where the memory of Valyria still lived in every black stone wall. Even after castles fell and kings bent the knee, Dragonstone would remain the ancestral seat of his house. It was the first foothold of the Dragon Lords in Westeros. And it would always stand as a reminder that the dynasty had risen from exile rather than inheritance. The conquest that followed would reshape the continent forever, yet its beginning was rooted in the patient survival of a family that had escaped a dying world and waited through generations on a smoking island. Dragonstone had given the Targaryens sanctuary when they were vulnerable. In time, it gave them the strength to become conquerors. Over generations, the careful work of rebuilding produced a dynasty that had never known the shadow of the 14 Flames. They had grown up in the shadow of Dragonmont, instead, among dragons that had hatched on their own shores. The blood of old Valyria ran thick in their veins, but the world they knew was a narrow one, confined to a volcanic island in a distant sea, surrounded by a continent that did not yet know its fate. It was on this island that Aegon Targaryen was born, heir to a family with an ancient past and a narrowing future. He grew up among dragon lords, his sisters Visenya and Rhaenys his cousins, the keepers of the beasts. He grew up surrounded by volcanic stone, the black and twisted rock of the castle, carved into dragons frozen in mid-flight. And he grew up with stories of the civilization his ancestors had escaped, a city of wonders that had burned to ash because they were wise enough to leave, stories of Daenys the Dreamer, of the doom that consumed the world's greatest empire, and of the long century of silence that followed. The painted table was carved for him, a map of Westeros in wood, a reminder of the world that lay just beyond the waters of Blackwater Bay. Every Targaryen raised on Dragonstone understood that they were survivors of a catastrophe, but Aegon understood something more. He understood that survival was not enough. A family that only looks backward will eventually find that the past has swallowed them whole. The civilization his ancestors had escaped was dead, and with it the old ways of power. The Dragon Lords of Valyria had ruled through fire and blood, but they had also ruled through a united will. In Westeros there were 7 kings, 7 armies, 7 separate ambitions. Aegon saw this not as a barrier, but as an invitation. Unlike the vanished lords of Valyria, who had sought power through conquest and commerce across the eastern continent, Aegon looked west rather than east. He saw a land divided into 7 squabbling kingdoms, a land that had never been united under a single crown. He saw a continent that was ripe for a single will, a single name, a single dynasty. The east was a graveyard. The west was an unclaimed prize. His ambition would transform Dragonstone from a refuge into the first seat of a new empire. The fortress that had sheltered his family for 100 years became something else entirely. It became the headquarters of a conquest. From these black stone halls, Aegon planned the invasion of Westeros. He gathered his swords, his allied houses, his sister wives, and his dragons. He rode Balerion, the Black Dread, a beast born in Valyria before the Doom, a living link to the power his ancestors had abandoned. But Aegon was no mere conqueror riding a monster. He was a strategist, a builder, a king in waiting. It was here, on the shores of Dragonstone, that Aegon raised his banners and declared his intent. He sent ravens across the narrow sea. He demanded that the lords of Westeros accept him as their king. When they refused, he did not negotiate. He simply moved. The first war of the conquest began not with a battle, but with a landing. Aegon's fleet carried his army across Blackwater Bay to the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. He did not build his capital on Dragonstone. He built it where he first set foot on the mainland, a new city rising from the mud and the reeds. Dragonstone remained his seat of power throughout the early campaigns. The island was the anvil upon which the realm was forged. From here Visenya flew Vargar to subdue the Vale. From here Rhaenys flew Meraxes to bring the Reach to heal. And from here Aegon himself rode Balerion to the Field of Fire ending the last great resistance of the southern kingdoms in a single afternoon of ash and terror. But as the conquest solidified, Dragonstone's role began to change. The island had been the launch point, but it could not be the throne room. Aegon needed a capital that sat at the centre of his new realm, not at its eastern edge. He ordered the construction of the Aegon Fort on the site of his first landing, a fortress of wood and earth that would one day become the Red Keep. He established King's Landing as the seat of the Iron Throne, and yet he never forgot Dragonstone. He understood that it was the birthplace of his dynasty, the place where the last Dragon Lords had landed, the place where the future had found a foothold. In the years after the conquest, Aegon returned to the island often. The volcanic stone, the dragon caves, the echo of the sea against the black cliffs, these were the foundations of his identity. He had not built a new empire to escape the past. He had built it to honour the decision that a young girl had made 2 centuries earlier, a decision to believe a dream rather than the confidence of a dying world. Dragonstone was given a new purpose. It became the seat of the heir to the Iron Throne. The Prince of Dragonstone would rule from this island, learning the history of their family that waited for them. It was a tradition that would last for nearly 300 years, a reminder to every Targaryen that their power began not on the Iron Throne, but on a volcanic island in a narrow sea, where a family of Dragon Lords had once landed with nothing but fire, hope, and a dream. And it was from this island that the next generation of Targaryens would watch the horizon, always aware that the legacy they carried was built on the ashes of a world that no longer existed. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. The ambitions of House Targaryen had always been tied to the volcanic shores of Dragonstone, but the mind of Aegon the Conqueror was already reaching far beyond the black cliffs of the island. He understood that his family could not remain a footnote in history, a forgotten offshoot of a ruined empire. To survive, to truly fulfill the prophecy that had saved them, they needed to leave. And so, Aegon commissioned a vast wooden map of Westeros, carved in the shape of the continent. This was no ordinary map. It was an instrument of war, a declaration of intent, and a statement of philosophy, all carved into a single massive slab of wood. The table was enormous, its surface shaped with astonishing precision to mirror the coastline of Westeros. Every bay, every peninsula, every major river was carved into the wood. It must have taken years to build, requiring craftsmen and cartographers to get the proportions right. But Aegon had been patient. He knew what he was building was not just a piece of furniture, it was the foundation of a throne. He had it placed in the Great Hall of the Stone Drum, the central tower of Dragonstone, where the volcanic heat from the Dragonmont below kept the chamber warm even in the deepest nights. The table dominated the room. It was the room. When the craftsmen completed their work and laid the painted surface before him, Aegon issued a specific instruction. The paint carried no borders. There were no lines dividing the north from the riverlands, no boundaries marking the territories of the 7 kings who called themselves sovereign. This was deliberate. Aegon did not recognize the 7 kingdoms as permanent divisions. In his eyes, they were simply fragments of a larger whole, a single realm that had fallen apart and would be brought back together under one house, one crown, one dragon. From Dragonstone, he studied the table for years. He came to know the rivers, the castles, the coasts, and the mountain passes as intimately as a sailor knows the stars. He traced the course of the trident with his fingers, noting where an army could cross and where it would be trapped. He examined the heavily fortified castles of the Reach and the stormy coasts of the east. He marked the strongholds that would need to be taken and the ones that could be bypassed. He studied the weaknesses of the rival kings. The north was vast and poor, hard to hold but easy to isolate. The riverlands were rich but surrounded on all sides, with no natural defences. The Westerlands had gold, but their army could not march quickly enough to answer a threat from the sea. The Stormlands relied on their fortresses. But fortresses were useless against dragons. The Reach was prosperous but weakened by the internal rivalries of its strongest houses. Dorne was distant and proud, but even pride could be broken with the right pressure. The Ironborn were a nuisance, raiders without the strength to hold what they took. He saw that their greatest weakness was their division, their inability to unite against a common foe. They had no dragons of their own. The table became the quiet war room from which the conquest of Westeros was imagined. Here, in the flickering torchlight, Aegon, Visenya and Rhaenys held their councils. The ceiling echoed with the occasional rumble of the Dragonmont, a constant reminder of the power sleeping beneath their feet. They moved small carved figurines across the painted wood, tracing flight paths for their dragons, planning the landing sites for their armies. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind through the arrow slits, was met with the steady certainty of a plan refined countless times. The shallow curves of the rivers, the deeper grooves of the mountain ranges, the stone markers placed where the great castles stood. For hours, Aegon would stand looking at the table, seeing not just a map, but the future of an entire continent. It was on the painted table that the war was won. Long before the first fleet left the shores of Dragonstone, the strategy had been fixed, every route memorized, every outcome weighed. The table had taught him the land, and the land had taught him how to conquer it. Now the campaign that had been plotted in its contours was ready to be executed. The painted table had served its purpose. Aegon gave the final command. The Targaryen fleet raised anchor in the harbour of Dragonstone and sailed west toward the coast of Westeros to turn the map into a kingdom. The island fortress fell silent behind them, the painted table sitting alone in the stone drum, a record of the ambition that had finally taken wing. The fleet came ashore at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, on a low stretch of land where three great kingdoms met. It was not the richest coast, nor the strongest, but it was perfectly placed. From there, Aegon could strike north into the Riverlands, west toward the Westerlands, or south into the Stormlands. He ordered a wooden fort raised on the hill above the landing place, a simple beginning for what would one day become King's Landing. Then the dragons took to the sky, and the lords of Westeros began to understand that the age of 7 separate kings was ending. The painted table occupied a chamber of its own at the heart of the stone drum. It was a vast surface, carved from a single colossal weirwood tree, and upon it lay the whole of Westeros in perfect miniature. Standing over it, Aegon Targaryen could trace the coastline of the continent he meant to rule. The map had no borders, as in his mind, there were no borders there yet. No Stormlands, no Reach, no Riverlands. Just a single landmass waiting for a single master. But a map is only a map. It cannot raise armies, fly through storms or breathe fire. For that, Aegon needed companions who shared his vision absolutely. He did not have to look far. Aegon did not prepare to invade alone. His sister wives Visenya and Rhaenys stood beside him. In the traditions of old Valyria, such marriages were common among the Dragon Lords, meant to keep the bloodlines pure and strong. In Westeros, the faith of the Seven would call it an abomination. Aegon did not care. The Targaryens were bound not by the faith of the Seven, but by blood and by fire. Visenya was the eldest of the three. She was stern, proud, and a formidable warrior who carried the Valyrian steel longsword Dark Sister. She was the discipline of the family, the one who sharpened the edges of their ambition. Rhaenys was younger, lighter of heart, yet equally fierce in her own way. She was the diplomat, the charmer, the one who saw the soft underbelly of resistance. Together, the three of them formed a single unit of rule, the three heads of the dragon. Rhaenys was said to have loved music and poetry, but beneath her gentle smile was a mind as sharp as Dark Sister. She understood that conquest was not just about fire, it was about submission. It was about making the defeated lords believe they had chosen to bend the knee. Visenya understood only the fire. She believed that fear was the most reliable currency of power. Aegon listened to both. He was the center, the king, the decision-maker, but he was not a tyrant to his sisters. They were his equals in the old way, and they had their equals among the dragons. Aegon rode Balerion the Black Dread. Balerion was the last living creature, born in the Valyrian freehold. He had passed through the Doom. He was vast beyond belief, his scales as black as iron, his wings so wide they could cast a shadow over an entire city. When the Black Dread roared, the sound was felt in the chest, a deep tremor that shook the very air. Visenya rode Vhagar. Vhagar was younger than Balerion, but no less fierce. She was a beast of war, loyal only to Rhaenyra, known for her temper and her savage strength. Rhaenys rode Meraxes. Meraxes was the swiftest of the three, a silver-blue dragon who seemed to be made of wind and fire. She was elegant, but just as deadly. Her flames burned as hot as any. Together, the three dragons gave House Targaryen a weapon Westeros had not faced in living memory. In the Age of Heroes, the first men had fought with bronze and stone. The Andals had brought iron and the faith. The Rhaenyra had brought water magic, but none had ever faced the living embodiment of volcanic destruction. A dragon was not a weapon of war in the conventional sense. A dragon was an instrument of total subjugation. No castle wall could withstand it. No army could hold formation against it. The greatest generals of Westeros had never faced an enemy that could fly. They had never faced an enemy that could burn 1,000 men in a single breath. They were about to learn. The ancient power of Valyria had been built on the backs of dragons. Every road, every city, every fortress had been carved by enslaved hands under the shadow of winged conquerors. The lords of Westeros knew the stories. They knew of the dragon lords across the narrow sea, but stories and reality are very different things. Aegon intended to teach them the difference. Dragonstone was the anvil upon which this lesson would be forged. The island itself was a fortress of volcanic stone. The Dragonmont rumbled constantly, filling the caves with warmth, providing the perfect environment for dragon eggs to hatch and for dragons to grow. The castle was shaped to resemble its rulers. Stone dragons guarded the gates. Gargoyles and wyverns lined the walls. It was a seat that reminded every visitor exactly who they were dealing with. It was a house of dragons, and now that house was preparing for war. The island's small household was preparing to challenge 7 kings and millions of subjects. It seemed an impossible task. The Reach could field 60,000 swords. The North could raise 40,000 spearmen. The combined strength of the 7 kingdoms dwarfed the population of Dragonstone many times over. The Targaryens did not have the numbers. They did not have the gold. They did not have the allies. They had 3 dragons, and they believed that was enough. The forges of Dragonstone burned day and night. Armor was repaired, swords were sharpened. The small fleet of the Velaryons and the Targaryens was stocked. The hulls cleaned and caulked. Every sword that could be spared was brought to the island. Every man who could fight was trained. The household of Dragonstone was not an army. It was a scalpel. It was designed for precise, overwhelming force. In the chamber of the painted table, the 3 heads of the dragon met every night. The map showed a land without borders. Aegon, Visenya and Rhaenys studied it with intense focus. They spoke of the Riverlands, the Stormlands, the Crownlands. They debated who would fight and who would kneel. They did not discuss defeat. Defeat was not an option. The only question was the path. Aegon had chosen his first target. He would not attack the strongest kingdom first. He would not attack the weakest. He would land at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, a small fishing village that controlled the main harbour of the eastern coast. It was not a seat of power. It was not a symbol of anything, but it was a foothold, a place to build a capital, a place to store supplies, a place to launch the formal submission of a continent. The decision was made. The fleet assembled in the harbour below the castle. The dragons were fed and saddled. The Targaryens left their ancient seat, the stone carved into the shape of their power. They left the smoking Dragonmont behind. They left the wooden map that held their dreams. They took only their swords, their families, and their fire. The war for Westeros had begun. It began not with a single battle, but with the flap of a wing leaving Dragonstone. The shadow of Balerion, the Black Dread, was already crossing the narrow sea, and nothing on the mainland would ever be the same. The planning was finished. Aegon Targaryen, standing before the painted table in the stone drum, had spent years considering every shore, every river, every stronghold carved into the map. His sisters, Visenya and Rhaenys, were ready at his side. Their dragons, Vargar and Meraxes, had grown powerful enough to challenge any army in Westeros, and Balerion, the Black Dread, had reached a size unseen since the Doom of Valyria. The time for deliberation was over. In 2 BC, Aegon's fleet sailed from Dragonstone toward the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. It was not a vast, sprawling armada. The force was deliberately lean. Aegon understood that this invasion would not be won by grinding through sieges with men and horses alone. It would be won by fear, by speed, and by the shadow of wings falling across fields and castles. The ships carried knights, supplies, and the horses of a few trusted lords. They hugged the coast of the island, past the dark peak of the Dragonmont, and set a course across the narrow waters of Blackwater Bay. The crossing was short, barely a few hours. From the towers of Dragonstone, the hills of the mainland were already faintly visible on the horizon. The Targaryens were not crossing a sea to reach their conquest. They were crossing the mouth of a bay. The landing ground was already in sight. When the fleet reached the northern shore, Aegon stepped onto the soil of Westeros. His landing was modest in numbers. Perhaps a few hundred men followed him ashore, but the symbolism was absolute. Dragon lords had come to claim Westeros. The age of the Seven Kingdoms, as the world had known them, was about to end. The people who witnessed that first landing had no army to oppose them. They had only the sight of 3 dragons descending over the water, their wings blotting out the morning sun. Behind the expedition, Dragonstone remained the secure base. From its harbours, reinforcements could be summoned. From its rookery, ravens could carry orders back to the narrow sea. The island was the anchor of the entire campaign. It held the Targaryen treasury, the spare dragon eggs, the loyal garrisons who would hold the line if the invasion faltered. Every step Aegon took inland was a step supported by the volcanic fortress at the mouth of the bay. It is worth remembering that the conquest of Westeros did not begin from a grand capital. It did not begin from a throne room or a bustling city. The conquest began not with a grand capital, but with a volcanic island at the bay's entrance. Dragonstone was a place of black stone and searing heat, of carved stone dragons and sulphurous air. It was the last outpost of a dead civilization, and yet from this unlikely foundation, a dynasty was born. The landing party set to work immediately. Tents were erected, supplies were unloaded. Aegon climbed to a high point overlooking the shore. The painted table had shown him the shape of the continent. But now, he stood at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, and the continent was real beneath his feet. The hills rolled green to the north. The river flowed dark and slow to the south. And at his back, the only home House Targaryen had ever known, the island of Dragonstone, stood dark and silent on the horizon, waiting. The island itself was left in the hands of a capable castellan. The garrison prepared for a long wait. The rookery was stocked with ravens, trained to fly to every major keep in Westeros, and the free cities of Essos. The harbours were cleared, ready to receive ships carrying supplies or wounded. The volcanic heat of the Dragonmont continued to warm the hatcheries, where new dragon eggs baked in the sand. The island did not stop breathing just because its lord had left. It pulsed with readiness. The decision to launch the conquest from Dragonstone, rather than from a base in Essos, was a deliberate choice. Aegon could have sought allies in the free cities. He could have built a fleet in Lys or Mire. Instead, he chose to begin from the westernmost outpost of Valyria. He wanted the continent to understand that this invasion was not the work of Essosi sellswords. It was the return of dragon lords, and their true home, the only home they knew, was the black island that now stood watch behind his landing force. The small folk who lived nearby had fled. Word spread quickly through the villages and hamlets of the Crown Lands. Dragons had come across the sea. A Targaryen king had landed. The lords of Westeros, who had ignored Dragonstone for 100 years, could no longer pretend the family of dragon lords was a relic of a forgotten age. The wolves of the north, the lions of the rock, the stags of the Stormlands. Everyone would hear the news within a fortnight. The invasion was no longer a rumour. It was a fact, advancing from the shore of the Blackwater rush. The army began its march. The dragons hunted. The field of war stretched out before them, and the history of the island had shifted. It was no longer a refuge. It was the origin point of a new age. Dragonstone, the ancient seat of fallen Valyria, had become the quiet guardian of the rear, its fires burning low in the distance, a steady beacon behind the army as it pushed forward toward the heart of the continent. When Aegon the Conqueror landed at the mouth of the Blackwater rush in 2 BC, he did not command a massive army. He had thousands of men, but not the kind of overwhelming numbers that the lords of Westeros were used to fearing. What he had was something else entirely. He had dragons, and he understood that to win Westeros, he did not need to fight every battle. He needed to make the entire continent understand that their old ways of war were finished. He needed to prove that the age of castles and crowns and ancient rivalries was over. Aegon's campaign showed that castles, crowns, and old rivalries could not withstand dragonfire. The Riverlands were ruled by Harren the Black, a king who had built the largest castle in the world. Harrenhal, its towers were thicker than any wall on the continent. Its halls were vast enough to house an entire army. Harren believed no force on earth could breach it. He did not believe anything could threaten him from above. When Aegon gave him the chance to surrender, Harren refused. He laughed. He said his walls would stand for 1,000 years. Aegon replied that he had a dragon, and the clock was ticking. Valerian took flight over Harrenhal. The fire that melted the stone burned so hot that the iron gates themselves began to run like liquid. Harren the Black and all his sons burned inside their own keep. The curse of Harrenhal had only just begun. Harrenhal melted beneath Balerion, while the field of fire broke the might of the Reach and the Rock. If Harrenhal proved that no fortress could resist a dragon, the field of fire proved that no army could. King Mern Gardner of the Reach and King Loren Lannister of the Rock set aside their ancient rivalry and combined their forces. It was the largest army ever assembled in the history of Westeros. 50,000 men, knights in gleaming armour, archers, spearmen, the pride of the south. Aegon met them on a field south of the Gold Road. He brought his sisters and their dragons, Visenya on Vargar, Rhaenys on Meraxes. The 3 dragons swept low. The field turned into a furnace. 4,000 men died in a single afternoon. House Gardner was extinguished entirely. Mern the Ninth was the last of his line. Loren Lannister barely escaped with his life. He knelt to Aegon shortly after, and he was allowed to keep his lands and his title. It was a lesson that the lords of Westeros would never be able to forget. As the news of these battles spread across the continent, every remaining king had to make the same choice. Some kings bent the knee. Others died defending kingdoms that had endured for centuries. Torrhen Stark was the king in the north. His kingdom had stood for 8,000 years. He crossed the neck with 30,000 men, determined to meet the Dragon Lords in battle. But when he saw the destruction of the south, when he understood what dragonfire truly meant, he made a different choice. He knelt. He gave Aegon his crown. The north did not burn. The Starks remained as wardens of the north. And in the Stormlands, Argilac the Arrogant chose to fight. He had been one of the first to resist Aegon. He had sent Aegon a gift of his own severed thumbs, a brutal rejection of any peace. When Orys Baratheon met him in battle, Argilac fought to the death. His kingdom fell. The old songs of the Storm Kings ended. The pattern was clear. The old world was being erased. And with every submission, with every defeated army, with every burned castle, the rise of House Targaryen felt less like a random event and more like a carefully orchestrated fate. Every victory made Dragonstone's former exile seem more like destiny. Daenys the Dreamer had seen the doom from a distance of 100 years. Aegon had taken his family to the edge of the known world. The other dragon lords had mocked them as cowards, but the doom did come, and the Targaryens survived. Aegon was born into that legacy. He was raised in the shadow of the Dragonmont, learning to fly the largest dragon in the world. He did not conquer Westeros for simple greed. He conquered it because he believed it was his right. And as the crowns fell at his feet, the prophecy seemed to fulfill itself. Dragonstone was no longer just a refuge for a dying house. It was the engine of a new dynasty. When the fighting was over, Aegon had to build a kingdom. He did not rule from Dragonstone. Instead, he built a new city at the very place where he had first landed, at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. He called it King's Landing. The High Septon anointed him in the Starry Sept. He took the Iron Throne, forged from the blades of his fallen enemies, but Dragonstone remained his ancestral home. He looked across the bay at the mountain of volcanic stone, and he understood its meaning. The heir to the Iron Throne would always hold that island. They would be titled the Prince of Dragonstone. It was a direct link between the old world and the new, the prophecy and the throne, the volcano and the crown. Dragonstone stood as a permanent reminder of the fire that had forged the realm. The fires of the Field of Fire had barely cooled, and the great lords of Westeros had bent the knee. But Aegon the Conqueror understood a truth that would define his legacy. A throne cannot rule from the edge of the world. Dragonstone was his home, the cradle of his house, the last remnant of Valyrian majesty in the known world. But a kingdom needs a capital, not just a sanctuary. After the conquest, Aegon chose King's Landing as the capital of the new realm. He did not choose it for its existing grandeur, because it had none. It was a simple fishing village at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. He chose it for what it could become. The city stood closer to the centre of royal power, trade, and the conquered kingdoms than Dragonstone ever could. From the Blackwater, armies from the Riverlands could march, fleets from the Vale and the Crownlands could gather, and the great lords of the Reach and the Rock could be summoned without the exhausting journey of a full army across the entire continent. A wooden hill fort was raised, the first Aegon fort, a crude beginning for a dynasty that commanded dragons. And yet, Dragonstone did not lose its importance. If anything, it took on a deeper, quieter role. It became the ancestral sanctuary behind the throne. In a deliberate act of statecraft, the heir to the Iron Throne was styled the Prince of Dragonstone, linking the future of the dynasty directly to the island where their story had survived when Valyria did not. The island remained the place where the Targaryen story had survived when Valyria did not. Rhaenyra the Exile had chosen this rock over the glittering palaces of the Freehold. The stone walls were thick with the echoes of that choice. King's Landing was the future, open and growing and vulnerable. Dragonstone was the past, sharp and sealed and patient. The architecture itself reflected this division. King's Landing sprawled outward, a growing city of trade and politics. Dragonstone was built inward, down into the volcanic stone, shaped by dragonfire. The painted table remained in its great hall, a constant reminder of the map that Aegon had drawn in wood, a map without borders, a map of a united land. The lords of the narrow sea answered to Dragonstone, not always to the hand in the Red Keep. The island was a separate pulse within the body of the realm, a heartbeat that had begun in old Valyria. The two seats of the Targaryen dynasty were now locked in an eternal orbit. King's Landing was the sun, bright and demanding the attention of the entire continent. But Dragonstone was the silent, steady moon, dark on one side from the shadow of the Dragonmont, but always present, holding the tide of history in its gravitational pull. From that dark stone island, the family would train its heirs, guard its secrets, and keep its oldest memories. The dynasty had found its balance between the new world it had built and the old world it had carried across the sea. The capital had been chosen, but the home had never truly been left behind. The story of the Targaryen dynasty would now unfold between these two poles. A thread pulled taut across the Blackwater Bay, and every decision made in the throne room would echo in the volcanic halls of Dragonstone. That connection would prove more than ceremonial. Whenever the Iron Throne passed from one generation to the next, Dragonstone stood beside it as a warning and a promise. The prince who held the island was not merely waiting for a crown. He was being given command of a fortress, a fleet, a strategic harbour, and a piece of the family's ancient identity. To rule Dragonstone was to learn that the Targaryens were never simply another noble house of Westeros. They were descendants of another world. For Aegon's eldest son, Daenys, Dragonstone represented the expected path of inheritance. But the peace Aegon forged did not survive unchanged after his death. When Daenys became king, the realm saw how fragile conquest could be without the strength to hold it together. Rebellion rose in several kingdoms, and the faith turned against Targaryen customs. In those troubled years, Dragonstone remained a refuge, close enough to the capital to matter, yet distant enough to offer protection when King's Landing became dangerous. Then came Maegor, the younger son of Aegon, fierce, feared and bound to the island in a different way. He had been made Prince of Dragonstone before the crown ever came to him. When conflict shattered the royal family, the title became a symbol of competing claims. Dragonstone was no longer only the inheritance of a peaceful heir. It had become a prize in the struggle over what the dynasty itself would be. Its black towers watched the wars of brothers, nephews, wives, and rivals. Its narrow sea approaches carried ravens, soldiers, and dragon riders toward the capital. The island could not control all of Westeros, but it could threaten the waters around King's Landing, shelter a royal claimant, and serve as the place from which a lost prince might return. That made it one of the most important strongholds in the Seven Kingdoms, despite its small size and harsh shores. Later generations would understand this power even more clearly. Dragonstone was where heirs waited when the throne was occupied by another. It was where royal children were sent for safety, where dragon eggs were kept, and where the family's remaining connection to the creatures of Valyria could be protected from the noise and danger of the capital. In the halls beneath the Dragonmont, the Targaryens possessed something King's Landing could never provide: distance from the realm they ruled. But distance could also become isolation. A prince on Dragonstone was near the crown, yet not seated upon it. Every ship leaving the island might carry news of a king's illness, a rebellion, a marriage, or a death. Every raven could bring a summons to glory or a command to war. The island's rulers lived with the horizon always before them, knowing that their future lay across the bay, beyond the dark waters, inside the Red Keep. And so Dragonstone endured as both fortress and threshold. It was the final piece of Valyria standing in the west. But it was also the doorway through which the Targaryens entered the politics of Westeros. Its volcanic stone preserved the memory of dragons long after dragons themselves began to fade. Its towers reminded every prince who walked beneath them that crowns could be won by fire, but they could only be kept by blood, loyalty, and the careful use of power. After Aegon the Conqueror united the Seven Kingdoms and established King's Landing as the seat of royal power, the old fortress of Dragonstone was not abandoned. Instead, its purpose transformed. The capital was for the king. Dragonstone, in turn, was redefined as the domain of the king's successor. Dragonstone became the traditional seat of the heir to the Iron Throne. Aegon the Conqueror set this precedent by granting the island to his eldest son, Daenys. The title Prince of Dragonstone announced that its holder stood first in line to rule the Seven Kingdoms. It was a unique declaration among the great houses of Westeros. No other lord could claim that name. It belonged solely to the Targaryen heir, a constant reminder to the realm of exactly who would inherit the crown. The title was more than a political announcement. For generations, royal children came to the island to learn duty beneath the shadow of Dragonmont. They did not simply wait for their inheritance, they trained for it. They studied the scrolls of old Valyria, learning the high mysteries of the Dragon Lords. They bonded with their dragons in the shadow of the smoking volcano, learning to command creatures of immense power. They gathered around the painted table in the stone drum, tracing the borders of the realm they would one day rule. The island demanded a specific kind of strength. Its halls were carved in the shape of dragons, its walls black and forbidding. The storms of the narrow sea battered its shores relentlessly. The Prince of Dragonstone learned to command respect in a place that offered no comfort. It was an education in the burdens of power. The Stormlands and the Crownlands were visible from its towers, a constant reminder of the realm that awaited them. Island was a school of governance, a place where the future rulers of the Seven Kingdoms were forged in volcanic fire. The title carried prestige, but it also placed heirs close to the dangerous legacy of dragons. Dragonmont was not merely a mountain, it was a forge of living legend. Its fires had shaped the island, and its heat drew the creatures of old Valyria. The wild dragons that nested in its caves respected no bloodline and no title. The cannibal, sheep-stealer, grey ghost were a stark reminder that the blood of the dragon was not a tame thing. A Prince of Dragonstone learned to walk among them with caution, or they learned the cost of arrogance. The same power that made the Targaryens rulers of the continent could just as easily claim the life of a careless heir. This was the truth of Dragonstone. The dragons were not symbols, they were forces of nature, and the island taught its lords to respect that force above all else. Some princes of Dragonstone became legendary rulers, others never saw the Iron Throne. Balon the Brave, the son of Jaehaerys I, ruled the island with strength and honour. He was beloved by the small folk and feared by his enemies. But when he died before his father, the succession was thrown into chaos. The title of Prince of Dragonstone could not protect its holder from the grief of the realm or from the ambition of those who saw the vacancy as an opportunity. Perhaps no heir understood the weight of the title more than Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen. She held Dragonstone as the named successor to Viserys I. For years, she governed the island as a queen in waiting. She raised her children within its walls. She studied the painted table, plotting the future of the kingdom. When her father died, he launched her claim for the throne from the very chamber where Aegon the Conqueror had once prepared to claim all of Westeros. The island was her fortress, her home, and eventually a command post in a war that would shatter her family. For Rhaenyra, the title was a burden she carried across the narrow sea. She watched the court of her father from across the bay, knowing that many conspired against her claim. Yet she held Dragonstone, and by holding it, she held the future of the dynasty in her hands. The history of the Prince of Dragonstone is the history of the Targaryen succession itself. The heirs who lived there were shaped by the volcanic rock, the harsh winds, and the constant presence of dragons. They learned that the Iron Throne was not a prize to be taken lightly. It was a burden tested by the fires of Dragonmont. Each heir who took the title added their own chapter to the story. Some brought glory, others brought decline. But every heir understood that Dragonstone was the beginning and the end of their journey to the crown. The tradition of the Prince of Dragonstone persisted for nearly 3 centuries. It defined the succession of the Targaryen dynasty, but the strength of the tradition could not prevent the weakness of blood. When the succession was contested, the island that was built for the heir became the stronghold of a divided house. The painted table, a map of a united continent, soon became a map of war. The stone dragons of Dragonstone would witness the heirs of the conqueror turn against each other in a conflict that would consume the very dragons they had learned to master. A title implies a duty. For the Prince of Dragonstone, that duty was not just to govern a gloomy island fortress. It was to safeguard the very source of Targaryen power itself. The source was not the castle, but the creatures that lived within its shadow. Under the Targaryens, Dragonstone remained one of the great centres of dragon breeding in the realm. This was no accident of history. When Aegon Targaryen fled the Doom of Valyria, He understood that his family's survival depended entirely on the creatures he carried across the sea. 5 dragons accompanied the migration. Over the century that followed, only one of those original 5 is known to have survived. The Targaryens had to rebuild their strength from a very thin thread. The island of Dragonstone, with its active volcano, the Dragonmont, offered a habitat that, while a pale shadow of the 14 flames of Valyria, was still uniquely suited to the task. It was a nursery, and it had to succeed if the family was to have any future at all. Eggs were kept in heated chambers, dragons nested in caves, and riders returned to the island's volcanic slopes. The process was an elaborate ritual of life and death that governed Targaryen tradition for centuries. Targaryen infants were given dragon eggs in their cradles, a tradition meant to bind child and dragon from the very first breath. These eggs, often fossilized and cold to the touch, were placed within the artificial warmth of the castle's deepest chambers, heated by the volcanic vents that ran beneath the foundation. If the egg hatched, it was a sign of divine favor, a confirmation of the child's destiny. If it remained stone, the omen was dark, a shadow cast over the child's future. The Dragonmont itself was a warren of caves and tunnels, caverns worn smooth by centuries of fire and smoke. This was where the older, established dragons chose to sleep, coiled in the geothermal heat of the earth, growing vast and powerful on the herds of sheep and cattle driven up the slopes to feed them. The mountain breathed heat, and the dragons drank it in. The tradition of placing a dragon egg in a cradle was deeply symbolic, but it was also a practical gamble. The eggs themselves were often rejects, or ancient stones from the Dragonmont that had never quickened. To hatch a dragon, you needed heat, loyalty, and a bit of Valyrian blood. The heated chambers were monitored constantly. The dragon keepers would rotate the eggs in their stone cradles, keeping them warm. If a hatchling emerged, it was a moment of immense triumph and danger. The young dragons were volatile, their fire unpredictable. They had to be bonded immediately, fed charred meat, and trained to accept their rider's presence. The nursery at Dragonstone was not a peaceful place. It was a proving ground, where fire and blood met stone and will. But the military strategist, who looked only at the castle's walls, was missing the point entirely. The castle's strength came not only from its walls, but from the creatures sleeping above and below them. The garrison was not the soldiers standing watch on the ramparts. The garrison was the slumbering mass of scales and fire that occupied the volcanic caves. Should an enemy fleet appear in Blackwater Bay, the signal from the stone drum would call the riders to the Dragonmont. The true might of Dragonstone could not be seen from the shore. It had to be felt from the sky. Dragonstone was the living engine of the dynasty's greatest advantage. It was not a museum of past glories. It was an active, breathing forge. For over 200 years, it stoked the fires that kept the Iron Throne secure. The dynasty's strength was measured not in gold or men, but in the number of dragons that could be called to war, and every single one of them, from the mighty Vagar to the smallest hatchling, had their origins in the heated stone of that volcanic island. The engine never rested, never stopped. But engines require fuel, and fuel can run dry. The nursery, for all its immense success in securing the Targaryen dynasty, was also a fragile system. Eggs failed to hatch. Hatchlings grew sickly. The dragons of the later dynasty were visibly smaller than their ancestors of the conquest. The great advantage of the Targaryens was slowly, decade by decade, beginning to erode. The riders might still return to the slopes of the Dragonmont. They might still feel the heat rising from the vents, but the fires that awaited them were a little less fierce with each passing generation. The cycle of life on Dragonstone was slowing down, an inevitable consequence of inbreeding and isolation. The very factors that secured the Targaryen monopoly were also the seeds of its slow decline. The volcano that had given them the world was growing quiet, and the dragons themselves were beginning to feel a cold they had never known before. The family would soon face a war that would test the limits of the nursery like never before. challenging the assumption that the fire would always answer their call. The great stone chambers beneath the Dragonmont held warmth for the dragon eggs that rested inside them. But the men and women who held the title, Prince of Dragonstone, often found the island itself far less nurturing. The title was designed to honour the heir, yet the history of those who bore it is marked by disappointment, exile, and open family conflict. For a seat meant to signal the future, the Prince of Dragonstone rarely found a peaceful path to the crown. Not every Prince of Dragonstone became king, and not every royal occupant found peace there. The purpose of the title was to eliminate ambiguity, a formal declaration from the reign of Jaehaerys I. But the court of King's Landing had a long habit of overturning tradition. The Great Council of 101 rejected many claims in favour of Viserys, who in turn rejected the succession of his own reign. Dragonstone became an expectation unmet by the reality of politics. The island often housed heirs kept away from court, ambitious relatives, and families divided by succession. No one demonstrates this more vividly than Prince Daemon Targaryen. When the king named his daughter Rhaenyra as heir over Daemon, the prince reacted with open rebellion. He seized Dragonstone, crowned himself king of the Narrow Sea, and used its distance from the capital to challenge the realm. Dragonstone became an improvised throne room for a man who believed he had been stolen from his destiny. He left for the Stepstones only to return as the husband of the very heir he had once fought to supplant. The island contained the history of the dance within its walls, long before the first blow was struck in the Red Keep. Its distance from King's Landing made it a refuge, a prison, and a place for dangerous thoughts. Rhaenyra Targaryen ruled from Dragonstone for most of her father's reign. From that distance, she built her own loyalties, her own family, and her own vision of the future. The painted table in the stone drum became her war room. Yet the same isolation that protected her left her vulnerable. When the Greens moved to crown Aegon II, the ravens carrying the news struggled against the winds of Blackwater Bay. Rhaenyra learned her throne had been stolen not from a loyal ally, but from a messenger who had barely escaped the capital. Dragonstone had given her a sanctuary, but it had made her blind to the speed of the conspiracy. Dragonstone's isolation amplified every Targaryen quarrel. The dance of the dragons might have been fought across the continent, but its roots were in the black stone of the island. The usurpation of Rhaenyra's rights was a wound that festered in the corridors. When war came, dragon fought dragon over the very island that had been their nursery. There was no court to distract, no city to absorb the anger, only family, stone and fire. The result was a war that destroyed the dragons, broke the succession, and stained the title of Prince of Dragonstone with the ash of civil war. In the generations afterward, the castle continued to attract the restless and the rejected. Younger sons and ambitious cousins were sent there to be kept from the games of the Red Keep. Others fled there when the court turned against them. Daeron II granted the castle to his son, Baelor Breakspear, but even Baelor could not escape the quarrels of the family. The Blackfire rebellion saw the island change hands, its strategic position proving as valuable to rebels as it was to the crown. By the time of the Mad King Aerys II, the title had lost political weight, but the island itself still held its dark appeal. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen was born on Dragonstone during a terrible storm. He spent his early years there, reading and brooding, far from his father. It was among those volcanic rocks that he began to conceive of prophecies and actions that would tear his family apart. The island did not create the cracks in the dynasty, but it gave them a place to grow. When the storms of Robert's rebellion finally broke, Dragonstone was the last redoubt. It was where the Queen fled, and where Daenerys Targaryen was born in the same storm that claimed her mother. The cradle of the dynasty became the birthplace of its last survivor. The cycle of exile and ambition had come full circle. The title of Prince of Dragonstone faded from official use after the conquest, but the island itself remained, watching the shore. The ambitions that once echoed through its halls did not vanish. They settled into the stone, ready for the day when another hand would trace the painted table, and another voice would claim the legacy of the dragon. That is the paradox of Dragonstone. It was never merely a seat for an heir. It was a test of what an heir might become when given dragons, distance, and time enough to dream of a crown. Not every Prince of Dragonstone became king, and not every royal occupant found peace there. The island often housed heirs kept away from court, ambitious relatives, and families divided by succession. The truth of this was never more boldly demonstrated than in the year 126 after the conquest, when Prince Daemon Targaryen seized Dragonstone after King Viserys I rejected his ambitions. Daemon had long considered himself the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. He was the king's younger brother, a seasoned warrior, and the rider of Caraxes, the Bloodworm. When Viserys named his daughter Rhaenyra as his successor instead of Daemon, the decision kindled a deep resentment that had been simmering for years. Daemon felt not just a political slight, but a profound personal betrayal from his own blood. He had served the realm as commander of the City Watch and had fought in the Stepstones. The crown, he believed, should pass to a warrior, not a girl. He left King's Landing in a fury and took Dragonstone for himself. It was not an idle threat. He meant to hold the island as his own seat of power, a base from which he could command the narrow sea and challenge the legitimacy of the court in King's Landing. Daemon occupied the ancestral fortress as a dramatic challenge to his brother's authority. He raised his own banner over the castle of Aegon the Conqueror. It was a calculated act of defiance, a declaration he would not simply disappear from the line of succession. The castle was his birthright, and he would take it by force if it was not given to him willingly. The garrison of Dragonstone did not resist. Many of the men stationed there were loyal to the prince, and the island fell without a fight. Daemon installed himself in the Stone Drum, took control of the armory, and sealed the Dragon Gate. He was the master of Dragonstone in truth, if not in law. Then Daemon did something that turned the confrontation into a full crisis. He claimed a dragon egg. Not just any egg, but one that had been intended for King Viserys' unborn son. A child who represented the continuation of the royal line that had passed him over. By stealing the egg, Daemon provoked a crisis that threatened to turn family resentment into outright war. The theft of a royal dragon egg was a deeply symbolic act. It suggested that Daemon could raise a dragon of his own, a dragon loyal to him and to his ambitions for the throne. The egg was the future, and Daemon had stolen it from the very cradle. The entire realm held its breath, waiting to see if the dispute between the brothers would erupt into open conflict. The small council debated the matter furiously, with Ser Otto Hightower pushing for immediate war. The confrontation that followed revealed that Dragonstone could still become a weapon in a royal succession dispute. Centuries after Aegon the Conqueror had left the island to forge the Iron Throne, the fortress remained a tool of immense strategic and symbolic power. To hold Dragonstone was to claim the legacy of the Conqueror himself. Sir Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King, urged Viserys to march against his brother immediately. War seemed inevitable, because to let Daemon hold the island was to admit a fracture in the crown's authority that could never be healed. The crown could not simply ignore an open rebellion from the heir presumptive. The crisis did not immediately break into open war. Lord Corlys Velaryon and Princess Rhaenyra negotiated a settlement. Through their mediation, Daemon returned the egg, and the island was restored to its proper place in the succession. But the bloodless resolution did not erase what had been revealed. Dragonstone was not merely a quiet ancestral home. It was a fortress of defiance, a place from which a claimant could challenge the very throne of the Seven Kingdoms. Daemon had tested the limits of the crown and found them flexible, but he had also shown how easily the island could be turned against the Iron Throne. The precedent was set for future conflicts. The quiet that settled over the island after Daemon's occupation was profoundly deceptive. The intricate balance that held the realm together had been broken. The resentment between the brothers did not fade. From Dragonstone, a challenge had been launched that would soon reach far beyond the shores of Blackwater Bay. The castle, standing in the shadow of the Dragonmont, would soon bear witness to the full fury of a Targaryen succession crisis, as the family turned its dragons against itself in a conflict that would forever reshape the history of the Seven Kingdoms. When King Viserys died, Dragonstone became the centre of the storm. Princess Rhaenyra was living there, with Daemon, their children, and the dragons when news arrived that the king was dead and that the Hightowers had crowned Aegon in King's Landing. The island's old purpose returned in an instant. It was once again the seat of a rival Targaryen claim, guarded by black stone walls, volcanic cliffs, and the greatest concentration of dragons in the realm. Rhaenyra was crowned on Dragonstone, wearing the crown of her father and declaring herself the rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms. The ceremony was hurried, solemn, and filled with dread. War had not yet been formally declared, but everyone understood that peace was already slipping away. From the painted table, Rhaenyra and her council studied the realm as Aegon the Conqueror once had, marking the houses that might support her cause and the enemies who would need to be defeated. Dragonstone gave the Blacks more than a refuge. It gave them dragons, access to the narrow sea, and a secure position near King's Landing. Yet it also trapped Rhaenyra close to the enemy. Every ship crossing Blackwater Bay, every raven from the capital, and every movement of the Green Fleet became a matter of life and death. The castle was no longer simply a symbol of inheritance. It had become a wartime command post where the fate of the dynasty would be decided. Daemon Targaryen had stepped back from the brink of open war. His occupation of Dragonstone, that brief and fiery flash of defiance against his brother's rule, came to an end not with the clash of armies or the roar of dragons fighting in the sky, but with the slow, deliberate and measured weight of King Viserys' authority pressing down upon him from the distant Red Keep. The prince surrendered the castle without a battle. He returned the keys to the keepers of the royal household. He gathered his household, mounted his dragon caraxes, and departed the narrow sea, retreating to the lawless freedom of the Stepstones once more. But the deep tension he had stirred within the family, the underlying fracture between brother and brother, father and daughter, did not fade with his leaving. It merely sank deeper into the stone of the island, settling into the very bedrock of the Targaryen dynasty itself, waiting for the inevitable next spark to ignite it. King Viserys I had long ago made a choice that would define his entire reign, a choice that would eventually crack the realm in two and plunge it into civil war. He named his daughter Rhaenyra his heir to the Iron Throne. With this single decree, this declaration of his will, he broke generations of tradition that had always and without exception favoured male succession. From the very crowning of Aegon the Conqueror, the Iron Throne had passed from father to son, or from brother to brother, always to a man who bore the name Targaryen. The precedent of the Great Council of 101, which had passed over a female claimant in favour of a male cousin, had established this expectation across the Seven Kingdoms. Never before had a woman been formally named by a sitting king and publicly sworn to as the rightful successor. Viserys summoned the lords of the Seven Kingdoms to the Great Hall of the Red Keep. He made them kneel. He bound them by solemn oath to his daughter's cause, demanding their word be given before the Iron Throne and the eyes of the gods. It was an act of immense love for his only surviving child, and a gamble of immense proportions for the future stability of the realm. Within this new political reality, Dragonstone became absolutely central to Rhaenyra's claim. It was not merely a fortress or a home. The title of its ruler, Prince of Dragonstone, carried with it a legitimacy that no other title in the entire realm could match. Over the century of Targaryen rule, since the days of Aegon the Conqueror himself, this title had become synonymous with the heir apparent. To hold Dragonstone was to stand in the direct line of Aegon himself. It was to announce to the entire continent of Westeros that the succession of the Iron Throne flowed directly through you. For Rhaenyra, Dragonstone was not simply a residence where she lived. It was the very foundation of her political identity. It was the seat of her royal power, the physical proof of her right to inherit. The lords of the realm understood this language. The Prince of Dragonstone was the next king. The Princess of Dragonstone was the next queen. The island itself represented something far deeper than a strategic holding in the waters of Blackwater Bay. It was proof of who had the right to inherit Aegon the Conqueror's entire legacy. Every wall carved in the shape of a dragon, every stone heated by the constant volcanic warmth of the Dragonmont beneath, every corridor worn smooth by the footsteps of 100 years of Targaryen princes and princesses. All of it spoke to the uninterrupted heritage of the Dragon Lords. Dragonstone itself was a fortress, unlike any other in Westeros, shaped by the ancient sorcery of the Valyrian freehold. It was a constant reminder of the family's unique origin. For Rhaenyra, it was not just a place of rule, it was a place of deep connection to her ancestors, to the dragons that had made her family great. Within the stone walls of the castle, the painted table sat in the chamber of the painted table, a map of the realm that Aegon had united. Rhaenyra's presence on Dragonstone connected her directly to the founder of the dynasty. It connected her to the prophecy of the Song of Ice and Fire. The secret knowledge passed from ruler to heir. It connected her to the very blood of old Valyria, the only family of dragon lords to survive the Doom. The island was her claim made visible to all who looked upon it. The Targaryens had come from a city of dragons, survived the cataclysm of the Doom, and built a new world from this very island. Rhaenyra holding Dragonstone meant that the line of the Conqueror continued through her, that the dream of a unified Westeros passed into her hands. And as the king's health withered, as the years passed, and his body grew weaker under the burden of the crown, the seeds of conflict began to sprout. Queen Alicent's children grew to become rivals to their half-sister, Aegon II, Helena Aemond and Daeron. The realm began to divide around the central question of succession. Factions formed in the shadow of the throne. The Greens, standing with the Queen and her son Aegon II, gathered power in the Red Keep. The Blacks, pledging their swords and their loyalty to Princess Rhaenyra, looked to Dragonstone as their bastion of hope. In this gathering storm, this slow dance towards war, the fortress of Dragonstone became one of the first great prizes. It was no longer simply a home for Rhaenyra and her children. It was a declaration of intent waiting to be spoken aloud, a throne of black stone and obsidian, sitting in the permanent shadow of the volcanic peak of the Dragonmont, from which a queen would press her birthright against all who denied her. Rhaenyra remained there, surrounded by the symbols of her power. A dragon circled the volcanic cone. Her family was close by her side. Her claim was absolute and unyielding. The question of who had the right to rule the Seven Kingdoms would not be answered in the throne room of the Red Keep. It would not be decided by oaths sworn in the Great Hall. It would be answered here, in the skies above Dragonstone, in the searing heat of dragonfire clashing against dragonfire, as the succession of the realm was decided by the oldest law of the Targaryen dynasty, fire and blood. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. Viserys had named her his heir. Dragonstone was the seat of her claim. The title Prince of Dragonstone carried enormous legitimacy in the eyes of the realm, a right of inheritance that stretched back to the conquest itself. But the question that lingered, unspoken in the halls of the Red Keep, was whether those words would hold against the ambitions of a queen mother, the manoeuvring of a hand of the king, and the fragile conventions of a patriarchal succession. When Viserys I died, Rhaenyra was on Dragonstone. She was there, in the fortress her ancestors had carved from volcanic rock, while her half-brother Aegon II was crowned in King's Landing. The transition of power in the capital happened with almost surgical precision. Viserys passed quietly in his sleep, and before the realm could properly mourn, the Queen Dowager Alicent and her father, Otto Hightower, had moved. They sealed the gates of the Red Keep, secured the treasury, arrested or won over the masters of Whisperers and Coin, and placed the Conqueror's iron crown upon Aegon's head. Rhaenyra learned of it not from her father's ravens, but from the whispers of defectors in the Sudden, telling silence of courtly contact. She was in the midst of her own deep grief on the island. Her pregnancy had ended in tragedy on Dragonstone that very week. A daughter born too soon, named Visenya, who did not survive the birth. The loss of her father and her child, within the same span of days, left her hollowed out, but it also steeled her spine. Grief hardened into an unbreakable resolve. It was here, in the ancient stronghold of House Targaryen, that her supporters declared her queen. The ceremony took place in the Great Hall, beneath the carved stone dragons that guarded the chamber and the gaze of the painted table. Lords, who had sworn oaths to her father, gathered to affirm their loyalty. The knights of her Queen's Guard stood solemn watch in their white cloaks, sworn swords who would die for her claim. It was a coronation born of defiance, not celebration. The Dragonstone crown, a simple band of Valyrian steel set with rubies, was placed upon her brow by her own hand. She did not wait for a septon. She did not need a high septon to grant her what was hers by right. She became the first woman to claim the Iron Throne as its rightful heir. But her throne was not in King's Landing. Her throne was here, on this volcanic island, surrounded by the churning sea and the memory of dragons past. The crown of the Conqueror was a world away. But the crown of Dragonstone was a declaration of war, a clear signal that there would be no surrender, no quiet retirement to the ancestral seat. This was the beginning of a fight for survival, a fight that would be written in fire and blood. Dragonstone became the headquarters of the Blacks, the faction that championed Rhaenyra's claim. Across the narrow sea of politics, in the Red Keep, the Greens held the Iron Throne itself. The Queen Dowager Alicent, her father Otto Hightower, and the newly crowned Aegon II controlled the machinery of the realm. They had the treasury, the capital, the great houses of the Reach and the Westerlands. But Rhaenyra had Dragonstone. She had the ancestral home of her dynasty, the fortress where dragons had been bred for centuries. She had the loyalty of the houses, whose roots went deeper than the conquest itself. She had the support of Prince Daemon Targaryen, mounted on Caraxes, the bloodworm. She had the sea snake, Orlis Velaryon, who commanded the mightiest fleet in the known world. From the windows of the fortress, Rhaenyra could see the sails of Driftmark gathering strength. In the caves of the Dragonmont, the dragons stirred restlessly, feeding on the tension in the air. The island became a city of anticipation, filled with knights, lords, and the great winged shadows that passed overhead, casting their shapes against the black stone towers. The old refuge of House Targaryen now watched the family tear itself apart. The same stone corridors that had echoed with the laughter of dragon riders, the same volcanic chambers where eggs had hatched for generations, became the staging ground for a civil war that would shake the foundations of the realm. Rhaenyra walked the halls her father had once walked, touching the rough black stone as if she could draw strength from the centuries of Targaryen history it contained. She convened her council in the chamber of the painted table, spreading maps of Westeros across the surface and planning the movements of armies and dragons. Daemon whispered strategies in her ear, his voice a constant presence of fire and ambition. The war would not be fought far from these shores. It would begin here, in the shadow of the Dragonmont. The island itself seemed to feel the tension. The great volcano rumbled in distant sympathy, smoke curling from its peak. The dragons grew restless on their perches. Syrax, Caraxes, Melis and the others sensed the coming storm, their roars echoing across the bay, warning the mainland of what was to come. The dance of the dragons had begun, and there was no turning back. The stronghold that had once been a nursery for dragons was now a war room. The walls that had witnessed the birth of a dynasty now witnessed its fracture. The war would rage across the realm, consuming the Riverlands, the Reach, the Stormlands and the Crownlands. But its roots were here, in the black stone of Dragonstone, where the Queen of the Blacks held her court and waited for the first move. The fires that had once forged a kingdom were now being stoked to tear it apart. The dragons that slept in the mountain above her would soon take flight, and the world would never be the same. The war that followed Viserys I's death was not fought between strangers or foreign kingdoms. It was fought between brother and sister, between uncle and nephew, and between dragon and dragon. During the Dance of the Dragons, the creatures that had built the dynasty were turned against one another. Rhaenyra sat on Dragonstone, declared queen by her supporters, but her throne was an idea, a claim, not the physical Iron Throne. Across the Blackwater Bay, her half-brother Aegon II wore the Conqueror's crown in the Red Keep. There was only one way to settle such a divide, and it would destroy everything the Targaryens had built. Dragonstone served as a place of councils, hatchings, betrayals, and desperate efforts to find new dragon riders. From the Stone Drum, the ancient seat of the Prince of Dragonstone, Rhaenyra governed a war that she could not physically lead from the front lines. Her Black Council included Prince Daemon, her sons Jacaerys, Lucerys and Joffrey, and the experienced Lord Corlys Velaryon. Princess Rhaenys, the queen who never was, also lent her wisdom to these councils. They debated strategy, sent ravens across the narrow sea, and plotted the capture of the capital. But words and letters could not win a war fought in the sky. They needed riders for their dragons, and they needed more dragons. The island's volcanic chambers were filled with the heat of the Dragonmont, where dragon eggs were laid in the sands in the hopes of new life. Hatchlings emerged for Rhaenyra's younger sons. But the greatest resource of Dragonstone was not its eggs. It was its adult, riderless dragons. Vermithor, the Bronze Fury, once ridden by King Jaehaerys, slumbered in the Dragonmont. Silverwing, the dragon of Queen Alizanne, was wild and riderless. Seasmoke, the dragon of Lionor Velaryon, was without a rider, and there were the truly wild dragons native to the island: Sheepstealer, Grey Ghost, and the fearsome Cannibal. The presence of these powerful beasts made Dragonstone the most valuable military asset in the war. It was the desperate need for riders that led to one of the most extraordinary gambits in Targaryen history: the sowing of the seeds. Rhaenyra and her council put out a call for any man or woman with Targaryen blood, whether highborn or low, whether trueborn or bastard, to try their luck at claiming one of the riderless dragons on Dragonstone. The island was flooded with claimants. Dozens were burned alive for their ambition, but some succeeded. Adam of Hull, a dragon seed from Driftmark, claimed Seasmoke and became a loyal supporter of Rhaenyra. Hugh Hammer claimed the Great Vermithor. Ulf the White claimed Silverwing. These sudden dragon riders changed the entire shape of the war, but they also planted the seeds of the treachery that would eventually destroy Rhaenyra's cause. For a time, the war favoured Rhaenyra. With her new dragons and the support of the North and the Riverlands, she took King's Landing. She sat on the Iron Throne. She ruled from the Red Keep. But her heart remained tied to the island of her birth. But the victory was hollow. The Civil War proved that dragons could conquer kingdoms, but could not protect a family from itself. Rhaenyra's rule in the capital grew paranoid. Her treasury was empty. The new dragon riders were given lands and titles, but they grew ambitious. Hugh Hammer and Ulf the White betrayed Rhaenyra, taking their great dragons to Aegon II's side. In exchange for promises of even greater power, the war turned again. The treachery was felt keenly on Dragonstone, the very island that had given these men their wings and their power. Rhaenyra fled King's Landing after the city rose against her. She sought the safety of Dragonstone, expecting to find refuge, a fresh army, and a garrison loyal to her cause. She arrived on the island with little more than her son, Aegon the Younger, and a handful of loyalists. But the island had already been compromised. Aegon II had sent men ahead. The castellan of the fortress, a man named Alfred Broom, betrayed Rhaenyra. She was taken in the very halls of her fathers. Aegon II had won. The queen, who had declared herself ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, was fed to his dragon, Sunfire, in the yard of Dragonstone. The war was effectively over. Though the final steps of Aegon II's victory would be short-lived. By the end, the Targaryens had won the throne at a cost that hollowed out their greatest power. Aegon II was poisoned not long after, a victim of his own court, his own family. The crown passed to Rhaenyra's son, Aegon III. He was called the Dragonbane. Under his reign, the last dragons of the world died. They had killed each other in the sky, above the realm, during the war. The survivors sickened in the dragon pit, or the caves of Dragonstone. The last one, a small stunted, misshapen creature, died during the reign of Aegon III. The cause is disputed, but the point is the same. The great arsenal of House Targaryen was gone. The Dance of the Dragons had reduced the family to a dynasty of rulers, without their greatest servants. They were just lords now. Powerful lords, yes, but lords without dragons. The foundation of their power, the source of their mystique, the creatures that had made them gods among men, were dead. And Dragonstone, the fortress of their origin, was the tomb of that legacy. Dragonstone, the island that had birthed the dynasty and housed the war that broke it, fell into a long quiet. Its caves were empty of dragons. Its furnaces were cold. The halls that had once echoed with the sounds of hatchlings and the arguments of dragon lords now echoed with silence. It became a fortress of memory, a relic of a bygone age, but it remained the seat of the heir to the Iron Throne, a title that now carried an almost unbearable weight of history and loss. The Targaryens would never fully recover from the wounds they inflicted upon themselves on that volcanic island, and in the centuries that followed, Dragonstone would watch the slow unravelling of the dynasty it had once helped build. The Dance of the Dragons did not just end a war, it ended an era. Dragonstone had been the heart of that war. Councils in the chamber of the painted table, betrayals in the shadowed halls, desperate attempts to find riders, the wild dragons of the Dragonmont. But when the steel was cleaned and the ashes settled, the silence on the island was deeper than any winter. After the dance, fewer dragons remained, and those that survived grew weaker with each generation. The great dragons of the conquest and the civil war were gone. The survivors were wild, stunted, or broken. The young dragons of the dragon pit sickened. The eggs they laid were small, often infertile. The magic that had once fueled the bond between dragon and rider was fading from the world. There were those who whispered that the masters had a hand in it, studying the dragon and finding their weaknesses. Others believed it was simply the natural decline of a species isolated from its homeland. The truth was likely a combination. The dragons of Westeros were always an extension of Valyria, and Valyria was ash. The creatures that survived the doom and the dance were inbred, isolated, trapped. They were the last embers of a fire that had no more fuel. Dragonstone's breeding caves, once full of possibility, became symbols of a fading age. The volcanic heart of Dragonstone never cooled completely. The Dragonmont still rumbled. Its heat still seeped into the stone chambers where generations of dragon riders had laid their eggs. But the eggs no longer stirred. The keepers walked those tunnels in vain, tending to nests that yielded nothing. The hope that once simmered in those caves turned to resignation. The caves became a place of memory, of grief, of waiting for a miracle that never came. The last dragons of House Targaryen died, leaving eggs that hardened into lifeless stone. Under King Aegon III, the Dragonbane, the final dragon slipped away. He had seen his mother devoured by a dragon. He had watched his kingdom tear itself apart with fire. He was no friend to the creatures, but even if he had loved them, it would not have changed their fate. The last true dragon was a young female, a sad creature of green and yellow, with wings that could barely lift her. She lived her final years on Dragonstone, isolated and sick. She laid a clutch of eggs, but they were shells of stone, beautiful and hollow. When she died in the year 153, The age of dragons in Westeros was over. The eggs of the Targaryens turned to stone. They were kept as relics, as symbols of a lost birthright. But they were as dead as the empire that had birthed them. They rested in vaults and cribs, fossils of a forgotten magic. The dynasty endured, but its volcanic heart no longer beat with wings and flame. The Targaryens remained on Dragonstone. Kings were born in its chambers. Princes and princesses grew up in its shadow. The title Prince of Dragonstone continued, a solemn link to a glorious past, but the castle was hollow. It was a fortress carved into a volcano, guarded by stone dragons, haunted by the memory of fire. The heirs who lived there were no longer dragon lords. They were politicians, warriors, schemers. They looked out across Blackwater Bay, toward King's Landing, not toward the sky. They ruled with steel and marriage, not with fire and blood. The dynasty continued through the generations. They ruled through marriage, intrigue, and the strength of their armies. They lost dragons, but they held the throne. Dragonstone remained the seat of the heir, a constant reminder of where they came from and what they had lost. The volcanic island stood watch over the sea, patient and dark, waiting for the fire to return. That return began in the final days of the Targaryen dynasty. As Robert's rebellion consumed the realm, Queen Rhaenyra fled to Dragonstone with her young son Viserys. There, beneath the black towers and carved gargoyles, she gave birth during a terrible storm. The winds screamed around the castle, the sea smashed against the cliffs, and in the midst of thunder and salt spray, Daenerys Targaryen entered the world. She would be called Stormborn. But Dragonstone was her first home, however briefly. Before the rebels could take the island, loyal men carried the children across the narrow sea. The last heirs of the Dragon Lords escaped, while the castle passed into the hands of the new king. Robert Baratheon gave Dragonstone to his brother Stannis. It was not a gift Stannis ever truly wanted. He had held the island through the final siege of the rebellion, enduring starvation while waiting for relief that came too late to spare him bitterness. As Lord of Dragonstone, he ruled an ancient seat with a small hard people and little wealth, yet the island suited him in some ways. It was stern, isolated and unforgiving. Its black walls made no effort to charm those who entered them. Years later, when Robert died and the realm fractured once more, Stannis declared himself the rightful king. Dragonstone became the centre of his claim. From the painted table, he studied maps of Westeros, without borders or crowns, seeing the realm as one kingdom that needed to be reclaimed. Melisandre came to his court, bringing the faith of Rhaenyra and promises of power born from fire. In the caverns below the castle, flames were treated not as memory, but as prophecy. For a brief time, it seemed that Dragonstone might again become the source of a great transformation. Stannis sailed from its shores to strike at King's Landing. His fleet filled Blackwater Bay, and his banners came close to taking the capital. But wildfire turned the river green, and the battle ended in ruin. Once again, Dragonstone watched a claimant reach for the throne and fall short. Then came Daenerys. Across the narrow sea, the child born during the storm had grown into the mother of dragons. Against all expectation, eggs that had slept as stone awakened in fire. 3 dragons emerged, small at first but alive. The lost magic of House Targaryen had not vanished after all. It had only waited. When Daenerys finally returned to Westeros, Dragonstone was the place she chose to land. She walked through the halls of her ancestors and stood before the painted table where kings and rebels had planned their wars. The island that had witnessed the death of dragons now received their return. Above the same volcanic cliffs, wings beat once more, fire moved through the dark skies, and Dragonstone, patient through centuries of silence, became the heart of the dragon again. The dance of the dragons had broken the world. The great beasts that had once darkened the skies above Dragonstone were gone, or scattered, or confined to the breeding pits, where they grew smaller and more sickly with every passing generation. House Targaryen had survived, but it was a shadow of what it had been. The family that once commanded fire, made flesh, was learning, for the first time in centuries, what it meant to be mortal. In the wake of the dance, the tradition of naming the heir to the Iron Throne, the Prince of Dragonstone, remained. It was a formality, a bow to a history that was already slipping away. For more than a century, princes continued to hold Dragonstone as heirs to the Iron Throne. The title survived even as the dragons disappeared and the family became increasingly mortal. Aegon III, the Dragonbane, had watched his mother die. He had seen the last living dragon wither and perish within his own walls. His reign was defined by grief and loss, and Dragonstone itself seemed to share in that silence. His sons inherited the title. Daemon I, the young dragon who conquered Dawn from Dragonstone, only to be betrayed and killed in Dawn. Baelor the Blessed, who prayed fervently in the Sea Dragon Tower, and whose reign was marked by peace and piety rather than power. Baelor was the first of many Targaryen kings whose power rested solely on the consent of the realm, not on the threat of dragonfire. The dynasty did not collapse overnight. It was tested over and over again by the very forces that now defined its existence. Royal marriages, rebellions, Blackfire pretenders, and court conspiracies repeatedly tested the dynasty. Aegon IV, the unworthy, was the second son of a king who was never meant to rule. He held Dragonstone as prince, but his tenure was marked by decadence and spite. He preferred the pleasures of court, leaving Dragonstone to rot. When he finally took the throne, he legitimized all his bastards on his deathbed, setting the stage for generations of conflict. Daemon Blackfire, the first of the pretenders, drew his sword and called his supporters. The castles of the realm, including Dragonstone itself, became prizes in a struggle between true-born kings and ambitious bastards. Daemon II, the man who defeated the Blackfire pretenders, had himself been the Prince of Dragonstone. He spent much of his youth in the island fortress, learning to rule from a distance, while his father indulged in every vice at court. Daemon married a Dornish princess, Mirria Martell, a union that brought the entire continent of Westeros under a single crown for the first time since Aegon the Conqueror. But it was a peace built on compromise, and many did not accept it. The lords who had supported Daemon Blackfire chafed under the rule of what they called a Dornish king. The first Blackfire rebellion broke out in 196 AC. Dragonstone became a staging ground for the royal fleet. The war was brutal, but Daemon won. The rebellions did not end quickly. They flared up again under Daemon's son, Aegon, and again under the Mummer's dragon, the false pretenders who claimed the Blackfire name. Dragonstone watched these wars from the sea, a silent fortress that had seen far greater conflicts. The lords of the realm bled for a crown that was once worn by men who flew on dragons. Now it was fought over by men who rode horses, and through it all, Dragonstone remained. Dragonstone remained a reminder of what the Targaryens once were, even when their power no longer matched the memory. The fortress was a monument to an age of fire and blood. Every guardian statue was carved in the shape of a beast that no longer prowled the skies. The painted table, that massive map of Westeros, was no longer used to plan conquests. It was a relic, a piece of furniture from a time when the world belonged to the House of the Dragon. Aegon V, the unlikely, tried to change this. He was a Prince of Dragonstone before he was king. He was the fourth son of a fourth son. No one expected him to rule. He travelled the world in his youth, earning the love of the common people. He understood the history of his family intimately. He believed that if he could hatch a dragon egg, he could restore the balance of power in Westeros, that he could force the great lords to respect the crown once more. He gathered all the lore he could find on dragons. He attempted the rituals in the very caves beneath Dragonmont, where the Targaryens had once bred their dragons. He failed. At Summerhall, in a great fire born of his attempts, Aegon and many members of his family perished. The eggs did not hatch. The dragons did not return. Summerhall became a scar on the family memory, a constant reminder that the age of dragons was utterly gone and could not be recovered by willpower alone. The castle of Dragonstone remained, but the magic that had filled its halls had truly died. The decline was slow, drawn out across the reigns of kings who were increasingly unexceptional or increasingly mad. Jaehaerys II ruled for only 3 years. Aerys II held the title of Prince of Dragonstone, and when he took the throne, the cracks in the House of the Dragon began to show in earnest. He was handsome and charming in his youth, a friend to Tywin Lannister, but captivity during the defiance of Duskendale broke him. He grew paranoid, he grew cruel, he saw traitors in every shadow. Dragonstone, the castle of his youth, must have seemed like a distant world to the man who now hoarded wildfire beneath the Red Keep. His son Rhaegar was the last Prince of Dragonstone. He was born in Summerhall, in the ashes of the Great Fire. He was a bookish man, a warrior, a singer. He lived at Dragonstone for much of his early adult life, brooding in its dark halls, studying its ancient prophecies. He read the scrolls that Daenys the Dreamer had left behind, the records of the end of the world. He believed that the doom of his house was written in the stars, that he was meant to be a warrior for the dawn. He chose the title Prince of Dragonstone, embracing the history it carried. But his actions, his fateful choices with Lyanna Stark, would set the realm ablaze. The last Prince of Dragonstone chose prophecy, or perhaps love over duty. The realm burned for it. The dragons were gone. The princes still held the castle, but the memory of what the Targaryens once were could no longer protect them from what they had become. Dragonstone watched the end of the dynasty draw near, just as it had watched the beginning. The island fortress had seen the arrival of the first Targaryens fleeing the doom, and the last of them flee, a doom of their own making. The long decline was almost complete. The only question that remained was how it would finally end. For more than a century, princes continued to hold Dragonstone as heirs to the Iron Throne. The title survived even as the dragons disappeared, and the family became increasingly mortal. The last of these princes was perhaps the most enigmatic of the entire dynasty. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen held Dragonstone as heir during the final years of his father Aerys II's reign. The fortress matched him perfectly. It was ancient, brooding, and full of shadows. He spent long hours there, reading scrolls and studying prophecy, searching for a prince that was promised. He was admired by many. He was skilled with a blade, gifted with a harp, and respected by lords and small folk alike. He had the look of a king, yet his choices helped ignite the rebellion that would destroy his house. The tourney at Harrenhal, the crowning of Lyanna Stark over his wife Elia, the disappearance with Lyanna, all of it became a fuse. His father's madness lit the spark. The execution of Rickard and Brandon Stark, without trial, was the act that united the great houses against the crown. Rhaegar, the symbol of the dynasty's hope, became a symbol of its betrayal. As Robert's rebellion spread, Dragonstone became the refuge of the royal family's last hopes. The island fortress was isolated and well garrisoned. Queen Rhaenyra and her son Viserys were sent there for safety. It was from Dragonstone that Rhaegar led his army to the Trident. Never to return, the island waited. It waited through the war, through the fall of King's Landing, through the murder of Rhaegar's other children. In the midst of this waiting, Daenerys Targaryen was born on Dragonstone, in the middle of a terrible storm. Her mother died, bringing her into the world. Dragonstone, the cradle of the Targaryen dynasty, had witnessed its latest beginning and the final end of its line. The island that had saved the Targaryens from the doom could not save them from their own collapse. The fleet of their enemies closed in. The garrison knew there was no point in dying for a lost cause. Viserys and Daenerys were smuggled across the narrow sea. The castle surrendered. The great stone fortress, carved in the image of the dragons it once housed, fell silent. The legacy of the princes of Dragonstone, stretching back from Aegon the Conqueror, through the Dance of the Dragons and beyond, was complete. The fortress that had launched the conquest of the Seven Kingdoms now bowed to the victors of its last war. Its walls, still smelling of salt and ash, would serve a new lord. The dragon banner was lowered, a stag was raised, and the stone dragons kept their silent vigil over the sea. Robert Baratheon gave Dragonstone to his younger brother Stannis. To Robert, it was a reward of great importance, the ancestral seat of a fallen dynasty and one of the strongest castles in the realm. To Stannis, it was a slight. Dragonstone had traditionally belonged to the heir to the throne, and Stannis believed the honour should have been his after Robert became king. Instead, Robert named their youngest brother Renly Lord of Storm's End, while Stannis received the bleak volcanic island that had once been the heart of Targaryen power. Still, Stannis ruled Dragonstone with the same grim sense of duty that defined every part of his life. He repaired its defences, commanded its ships, and held its narrow black halls as a loyal servant of the crown. When the Greyjoy rebellion erupted, it was Stannis who led the royal fleet to victory at Fair Isle, yet neither victory nor service ever earned him the warmth or recognition he believed was owed to him. After Robert's death, Dragonstone once again became the centre of a struggle for the Iron Throne. Stannis declared that Joffrey Baratheon was born of incest and had no rightful claim to the crown. By law, Stannis said, the throne belonged to him. From the ancient seat of the Targaryens, he proclaimed himself the one true king of the Seven Kingdoms. The old fortress changed beneath his rule. Its stone dragons remained, but a new fire burned within its chambers. Melisandre of Ashai came to Dragonstone with her red robes, her strange prophecies, and her faith in the Lord of Light. She saw Stannis not merely as a king, but as a figure from ancient prophecy, a warrior destined to fight the darkness gathering beyond the world. On Dragonstone, the statues of the Seven were burned, and the Red God's faith took root in the shadow of the Dragon Lord's ruins. It was also from Dragonstone that Stannis struck at his enemies in ways few men could understand. A shadow, born through blood magic, slipped into Storm's End and killed Renly Baratheon. Another carried death to Ser Courtenay Penrose. These events gave Stannis victories, but they also deepened the fear surrounding his cause. Dragonstone had always seemed like a place where old powers slept beneath the rock. Under Stannis and Melisandre, many believed those powers had awakened. Yet Stannis could not hold Dragonstone forever. His war led him away from the island, first toward King's Landing, and then far north, where the true danger to the realm waited beyond the wall. The fortress remained behind, guarded by a dwindling garrison and haunted by the memory of every king, prince, and exile who had claimed it. Then Daenerys Targaryen returned. For years she had lived across the narrow sea as a fugitive, a princess with no castle and no army, but she had survived fire, hatched dragons, conquered cities, and gathered followers from every corner of the world. When her fleet finally crossed the sea to Westeros, Dragonstone was the natural place for her to land. It was where she had been born. It was the home of her ancestors. It was the place from which Aegon had once looked west and imagined a united realm. Daenerys walked through the gates of Dragonstone, not as a frightened child being carried into exile, but as a queen returning to her inheritance. She touched the sand of its shore and entered the old halls beneath the carved dragons. For the first time in a generation, the Targaryen banner flew once more over the fortress. Dragonstone gave her more than a symbol. Beneath the island lay vast deposits of dragon glass, the black volcanic glass that could destroy the creatures of the dead. What had once been valued for weapons and ornament became essential in the war against the White Walkers. The island's ancient fire and stone now offered a weapon against the cold darkness rising in the north, and so Dragonstone endured. It outlived conquerors, civil wars, mad kings, false kings, storms, sieges, and the extinction of dragons. It stood at the edge of the narrow sea, while dynasties rose and fell across the mainland. Its towers remained twisted against the sky, its dragons remained frozen in black stone, and its caves continued to breathe heat from the deep places beneath the earth. More than any castle in Westeros, Dragonstone was a monument to the Targaryen story. It was their refuge before conquest, their seat of power after conquest, their sanctuary in defeat, and their doorway home. Its walls remembered the first dragons to fly over Westeros and the last dragons to return. The rebellion that Prince Rhaegar's choices had ignited did not end with the splash of his rubies in the trident. It burned through the last of the dragon's line until all that remained was ash, a storm, and a single thread of life on a distant volcanic island. By the time the sack of King's Landing was complete, the Targaryen hold on the Seven Kingdoms had been shattered. The Mad King was dead. Prince Aegon and Princess Rhaenys were dead. Queen Elia was dead, but one dragon had escaped the capital. After the Targaryen defeat in 283 AC, Queen Rhaenyra fled to Dragonstone while pregnant with Daenerys. She was the sister and wife of the Mad King, sent to the ancient fortress during the worst of his paranoia. That paranoia, twisted as it was, saved her life. She carried the last child of the dynasty, a child Rhaegar would never know. Dragonstone braced for a siege it could not win. The Baratheon fleet blockaded the island. The remaining loyalists knew their time was measured in days. And then the storm came. On the storm-lashed island, she gave birth to her daughter and died soon afterward. The tempest was legendary, a fury of wind and sea that shattered the last of the Targaryen fleet and plunged the island into darkness. In the chamber of the painted table, the table that held the map of Westeros she would never see again, Rhaenyra gave birth. She named the girl Daenerys, a name of hope in the High Valyrian tongue. It was a hope born from tragedy. The birth took everything from her. Queen Rhaenyra died within hours, buried on the island, far from the ashes of the capital she had fled. With the queen dead, the fate of the children fell to her young son, the 8-year-old Viserys, and to a handful of loyal men, led by Sir Willem Darry. They knew the castle would fall. Before Robert's forces could seize them, a desperate escape was arranged. Viserys and the newborn Daenerys were carried into exile across the narrow sea. A single small ship slipped through the blockade, carrying the last living dragons into the east, into the unknown, into a world that had no throne for them. When Stannis Baratheon finally landed on the shores of Dragonstone, he found a fortress empty of its rightful lords. The heir was gone. The pretender king was just a boy on the run. The dragons had fled. For the first time since the Doom, Dragonstone stood without a ruling Targaryen inside its walls. Aegon the Exile had first settled here centuries before the conquest. Generations of dragonlords had been born, had lived, had ruled from this stone. The painted table, which had once guided Aegon the Conqueror, sat silent and misted with salt spray. The Dragonmont still smoked, but no rider sat the Dragonstone throne. The family that had carved this fortress from a volcanic crag that had raised it into the seat of a dynasty was gone. Robert Baratheon granted the island and its fortress to his younger brother, Stannis. A man of iron duty took possession of a castle of fire and blood. The stag of Baratheon flew over the dragon gates. The stone dragons carved into the walls, once symbols of a power that united a continent, now faced a future where their master was a stern lord, with no claim but justice. The island was now a Baratheon holding, an echo of a lost age, watching the sea for a return that seemed impossible. The Targaryen era on Dragonstone was over. The stone, however, remembers. It had been shaped by fire, and fire is patient. As Stannis settled into his new seat, the last of the Targaryen children were already crossing the narrow sea, carrying nothing but a name, a few loyal followers, and the memory of a house built on dreams. In Braavos, beneath a red door that Daenerys would remember all her life, Sir Willem Darry gave the children a brief shelter. For a little while, there was safety. There were lemon trees in the courtyard, servants to bring food, and the fragile illusion that the old world had not entirely vanished. But exile is rarely kind for long. Sir Willem was old and sick, and when he died, the protection around the children died with him. The servants took what they could. The house was lost. Viserys and Daenerys were forced back onto the roads of the free cities. They passed from Pentos to Myr, from Tyrosh to Lys, living at the mercy of merchants, magisters, and men who saw value in a fallen royal name. Viserys never forgot what had been taken from him. He carried the memory of the Iron Throne like a wound. To Daenerys, he became the last piece of the family she had never known. A brother who could be loving one moment and cruel the next, proud of a crown he no longer possessed, and terrified that even his name would be forgotten. Across the narrow sea, Robert Baratheon ruled a kingdom that believed the dragon threat had ended. Yet the threat endured, not in armies or castles, but in two frightened children moving from one borrowed home to another. Daenerys grew up hearing stories of a homeland she had never seen. Viserys told her that the people of Westeros waited in secret for their return, that loyal men still drank toasts to the Dragon Kings, and that one day the usurper would answer for his crimes. Those promises became the foundation of their lives. They had no gold, no ships, and no dragons, but they had a claim, and in the world of ice and fire, a claim can be more dangerous than a sword. Dragonstone had passed to Stannis, but its history had not truly been buried. Far away, the daughter born in the Great Storm was growing older, and though she did not yet know it, the fire that had once ruled from that black volcanic island had survived within her. The infant Daenerys Targaryen was carried away from Dragonstone before her first year was out, smuggled across the narrow sea by loyalists who refused to let the last dragon die. The castle itself, however, remained, and with the war won, Robert Baratheon had a choice to make about who would hold this ancient volcanic fortress at the mouth of Blackwater Bay. Robert Baratheon gave Dragonstone to his younger brother Stannis, rather than making him heir to Storm's End. This decision has been debated by historians in the world of the story for decades. Storm's End was the ancestral seat of House Baratheon, a fortress that had never fallen. Stannis had held Storm's End against the entire might of the Reach during the rebellion, starving himself and his men for nearly a year rather than surrender. He was the elder brother, the one who had bled for the cause. By every traditional measure, Storm's End was his by right. But Robert, in a gesture of affection for his youngest brother Renly, or perhaps a deliberate slight against the brother he found difficult and dour, granted Storm's End to Renly. Stannis was given Dragonstone instead. It was a powerful castle, yes, the original seat of the Targaryen heirs for 300 years, the place where Aegon the Conqueror launched his invasion of Westeros. But it was also a bleak, isolated outpost of a deposed dynasty, a world away from the fertile, powerful Stormlands. Stannis Baratheon accepted the castle, but he never forgot the insult he believed Robert had dealt him. He turned Dragonstone into a stern, disciplined seat, far removed from the feasting and noise of King's Landing, where the Red Keep was a hive of whispers and excess. Dragonstone under Stannis became a place of hard order. The castle's volcanic stone halls echoed with the clanking of armour and the recitation of lore, not with music or laughter. Stannis stripped the castle of the last remnants of Targaryen decadence, replacing the dragon motifs with the crowned stag of his own house. But the spirit of the place remained severe. The island's bleakness suited a man who measured life in duty, law and grievance. Stannis treated the castle not as a home, but as a fortress and a duty. The servants were kept in line. The garrison was drilled constantly. He held court in the Stone Drum, dispensing justice that was famously harsh but undeniably fair. When Balon Greyjoy crowned himself King of the Iron Islands in 289 AC, Robert Baratheon raised a host to crush the rebellion. Stannis was given command of the royal fleet. He hunted the Iron Fleet across the seas, finally trapping and destroying it at the Battle of Fair Isle. It was a decisive victory. For a brief moment, the realm saw Stannis Baratheon not just as the dour Lord of Dragonstone, but as a capable commander. But when the war was over, Robert returned to King's Landing, Renly returned to Storm's End, and Stannis returned to Dragonstone. The recognition he craved never came. For the next decade, Stannis remained on Dragonstone, serving as Master of Ships on Robert's small council. He spent much of his time in King's Landing, but his heart remained on the volcanic island. He hated the corruption of the court. Dragonstone was his refuge, his fortress of purpose. When Jon Arryn died, Stannis fled King's Landing. Returning to Dragonstone in the dead of night, he had uncovered the truth of the royal children's parentage. and he knew his life was in danger. When Robert died, Stannis proclaimed himself king from Dragonstone. He denounced Joffrey and his siblings as bastards born of incest, but he had waited too long. His brother Renly had already declared himself. From Dragonstone, Stannis issued his commands. The island's harbour filled with ships. Its forges worked day and night. He sailed for Storm's End, but could not take it. He was forced to march on King's Landing with a smaller army than he had hoped. The Battle of the Blackwater was his doom. Tyrion Lannister's wildfire chain destroyed his fleet. The arrival of Tywin Lannister and the Tyrell host shattered his army. In 305 AC, Stannis Baratheon was defeated and killed at the Battle of the Blackwater. His campaign, born from a sense of grievance and a rigid interpretation of law, ended in fire and black water. With his death, the Baratheon hold on Dragonstone ended. The castle was abandoned. The Great Hall fell silent. The painted table gathered dust in the draughty chamber, where Aegon the Conqueror had once laid out his own plans. The island had always been defined by its occupants. The Targaryens gave it fire, the dragons gave it life. Stannis gave it a grim, rigid order. Now it was barely anything at all. The Dragonmont continued to rumble deep beneath the earth, but no dragons stirred in its caves. The island waited, and on the other side of the world, across the vast salt sea, a young woman was growing up in exile. She had no memory of Dragonstone, no memory of the stormy night she was born within its walls, but she carried the blood of the dragon, and the castle, silent and waiting on its island of stone and fire, had not forgotten its true masters. Stannis Baratheon never wanted Dragonstone. It was a duty given to him by a brother who did not understand its weight, a slight disguised as a gift. The black castle carved in the likeness of dragons held no warmth for him. It was a place of cold stone and volcanic ash, a reminder of what he had lost. But when Robert died on the King's Road, the island suddenly became the only thing of value he possessed, the only platform from which he could launch his claim. He sat in the chamber of the painted table, his angular face reflected in the polished wood of Westeros. He knew the truth of Joffrey's birth. He had the proof. He issued his declaration. After Robert's death, Stannis declared himself the rightful king and made Dragonstone the centre of his claim. It was a strange echo of history. Once the island had launched a Targaryen to conquer the south. Now it launched a Baratheon to reclaim it. It was in these early days of his war that a figure arrived on the shores of the island. She came from Ashai. Her name was Melisandre. She brought with her the faith of R'hllor, the Lord of Light. The soldiers of Dragonstone watched her walk the ramparts, her red robes stark against the grey stone. Melisandre arrived with her red faith, bringing prophecy, shadow and promises of destiny. She saw visions in the flames. She told Stannis he was Azor Ahai reborn. The old gods were pushed aside. 1,000 fires filled the great hall. The painted table was red by firelight. Melisandre's influence grew. She gave Stannis a larger purpose. But the crown still mattered. He needed King's Landing. He gathered his banners. Ships were built in the shadow of the Dragonmont. Stannis stood on the cliffs, looking west across Blackwater Bay. The city was close. The prize was close. He sailed. The fleet was vast. The Black Stag flew on every mast. Stannis sailed from the island to seize King's Landing. But his fleet was shattered at the Battle of the Blackwater. The chain was raised. The wildfire erupted. Ships shattered. Men died screaming. Stannis watched his army burn. He survived, dragged from the water. But the war in the south was finished. Though Stannis survived that defeat, in the book and television timelines, Dragonstone's future grew uncertain as his war moved north. He returned to the island briefly, but it could no longer hold him. The true battle was in the north. The cold, the darkness. Stannis left Dragonstone. He took his army. He took his red priestess. He marched into the snow. The castle was left behind. The garrison was small. The great hall was silent. The fires of the Lord of Light flickered and died. Dragonstone was alone. The volcanic rocks simmered beneath the fortress. But the heart of the castle had gone cold. The history of the island paused. It became a waiting room for the future. The tide washed against its walls. The wind howled through its towers. Dragonstone returned to its ancient vigil, a lonely sentinel in Blackwater Bay, waiting for the next fire to be lit, waiting for the next dragon to cast its shadow against the stone. For a time, the island belonged to no great king at all. It remained nominally in Stannis' name, but his absence made it vulnerable. The Iron Throne could not ignore a fortress so close to King's Landing. Whoever held Dragonstone controlled an approach to the capital, watched the shipping lanes, and possessed a stronghold that had defied armies before. In the books, the Lannisters sent Sir Loras Tyrell to take it. He had his own reasons for demanding the task. Dragonstone was defended by men loyal to Stannis, and its walls were not easily broken. The assault was costly. Men died beneath the Black Towers, and Sir Loras himself was said to have been terribly burned by boiling oil. Yet the royal forces took the castle. The dragon banners of Stannis came down. The Red God's fires were extinguished. Dragonstone passed into the hands of the crown that Stannis had tried to destroy. But the castle never truly became Lannister. It was too old, too isolated, and too full of the memory of another dynasty. Its halls had been shaped by Valyrian craftsmen. Its towers were dragons frozen in stone. Even emptied of its ancient rulers, Dragonstone seemed to wait for Targaryen blood to return. That return came across the narrow sea. In the television story, Daenerys Targaryen crossed the waters with an army unlike any Westeros had seen in generations. She brought Unsullied from Astapor, Dothraki riders from the Great Grass Sea, ships from the Iron Islands, and 3 living dragons. Yet when she came ashore, she did not land at King's Landing. She came first to Dragonstone. It was the home her family had lost, the last piece of Westeros that had belonged to the Targaryens before Robert's rebellion. Daenerys walked alone along the beach, touched the dark sand, and climbed the steps beneath the stone dragons. At the gates, she entered without a battle. The castle had fallen into silence once more, waiting for the bloodline that had made it famous. Inside the chamber of the painted table, Daenerys found the map of Westeros still waiting. Stannis had studied it as a king without a kingdom. Now Daenerys stood before it as a queen with an army, a fleet and dragons. She had crossed the world to reach that room. Her first question was simple: where are my enemies? Dragonstone became her base of war. From its cliffs, she could see the distant shape of King's Landing across the bay. From its caverns came dragon glass, the black volcanic glass that could kill the creatures beyond the wall. The island was no longer only a symbol of conquest. It became a source of survival. Jon Snow came to Dragonstone seeking that dragonglass. He arrived as king in the north, though Daenerys did not recognize his crown. Their meeting began with suspicion, pride, and old grievances. Jon needed weapons against the dead. Daenerys needed allies against Cersei Lannister. Beneath the castle, they walked through the mines together, past veins of obsidian and ancient carvings hidden in the stone. Those carvings showed the first men and the children of the forest fighting side by side against the White Walkers. In the depths of Dragonstone, the past offered a warning. The wars for crowns and castles seemed small beside the darkness gathering in the north. The island had always stood between worlds. It was part of Westeros, but it faced east toward Essos. It carried the memory of Valyria, but it watched over the kingdoms of the Andals. It was a fortress of fire above a mountain of molten stone, yet it became vital in a war against ice. Daenerys eventually left Dragonstone behind, as conquerors before her had done. Her war carried her to King's Landing, and the city fell beneath dragonfire, but Dragonstone endured. It outlived Robert's resentment, Stannis' grim ambition, and Daenerys' brief return. Its black walls remained beside the narrow sea. That is the nature of Dragonstone. Kings may claim it. Queens may launch invasions from its halls. Armies may raise banners over its gates. But the island belongs fully to no one for long. It waits. It watches. And beneath its ancient fortress, the fire still burns. Stannis Baratheon left Dragonstone in the wake of his defeat at the Blackwater, taking his army north, never to return. The fortress fell into a period of deep quiet, isolated and waiting, its garrison scattered, its banners taken down. But the island had not seen the last of a would-be ruler. In 305 AC, Daenerys Targaryen returned to Dragonstone with Drogon, Rhaegal, Viserion, and an army from across the narrow sea. Her ships filled Blackwater Bay. The three dragons circled the volcanic peak of the Dragonmont, their wings casting shadows over the stone battlements. It was the first time dragons had flown over the island in over 150 years. Since the last of the Targaryen dragons had died out, she landed on the island she had been born upon during a storm. Though she had no memory of it, she was the last of her line, and she had come to reclaim what was hers. She walked through the halls of her ancestors as the first Targaryen ruler to reclaim the island in a generation. The corridors were damp and cold. The carved stone dragons seemed to watch her pass. She passed the kitchens, the armory, the great hall. The servants' quarters were empty. The garrison had long since abandoned their posts. It was a castle of ghosts, but she filled it with her presence. Fires were lit in the hearths. The three-headed dragon banner of House Targaryen was raised above the towers. She touched the painted table, the war map of Westeros that Aegon the Conqueror himself had used. She understood the weight of the place she now occupied. Beneath Dragonmont, she discovered vast stores of dragonglass, a resource vital to the war against the dead. The volcanic caves were deep, winding tunnels of black rock, and the dragonglass was everywhere, embedded in the walls, scattered on the floor. Stannis had known it was there, but he never had the resources or the time to exploit it fully. Daenerys had an army of Unsullied and Dothraki. She had the labour and the will to extract it. The dragonglass would be shaped into weapons to fight the White Walkers, a threat that Stannis had also believed in, but that Daenerys had the power to actually confront. Dragonstone became her base for the struggle for the Iron Throne. And once again, the old Valyrian fortress stood at the centre of Westeros' fate. Jon Snow arrived from the north, walking into the Great Hall, knowing what he had to do. He bent the knee and pledged the North to her cause. In exchange, he asked for the dragonglass and the dragons. Tyrion Lannister counselled her from the painted table. The island became a crossroads for the entire realm. It had been the launching point for Aegon the Conqueror. Now it was the staging ground for the final war for the Dawn. Together, they would leave the island to face the long night, and later prepare for the final battle in King's Landing. Dragonstone was the anchor for both campaigns. The Targaryen dynasty had been born in exile on this island. Its final chapter, in many ways, would be written from the same stone halls. The Dragonmont continued to smoke. The waves of the narrow sea crashed against the shore. The island had returned to the blood of the dragon. It stood ready for the war to come, yet Dragonstone would not remain untouched by the cost of that war. Daenerys used its harbours to gather fleets, its halls to plan invasions, and its high towers to watch the skies. From here, she sent her forces toward Casterly Rock, only to learn that war in Westeros would not be won through strength alone. Her enemies were clever, divided, and willing to sacrifice entire armies for advantage. Euron Greyjoy struck the Targaryen fleet on the open sea. Illyria Sand and the last of the Sand Snakes were taken. Theon Greyjoy was thrown into the water and left to survive the wreckage. Dragonstone remained secure, but the sea around it had become dangerous. It was also from Dragonstone that Daenerys flew north beyond the wall. Jon Snow and his companions had been trapped by the army of the dead, surrounded on a frozen lake with no path of escape. Daenerys came with her dragons, arriving through snow and darkness to pull the survivors from certain death, but the rescue came at a terrible price. The Night King killed Viserion with an ice spear, and one of Daenerys' children fell into the frozen water below. When he rose again, transformed into an undead weapon, the war for the Dawn became more urgent than ever. After that loss, Dragonstone was no longer simply a seat of conquest. It became a place where alliances hardened. Jon Snow and Daenerys stood together before the painted table. No longer strangers bound only by necessity, they prepared to sail north, leaving behind the southern prize they had crossed the world to claim. The Iron Throne could wait, the dead could not. But even as the living gathered at Winterfell, Dragonstone remained important to the fate of the realm. It was there that Jon learned the truth of his birth. Samwell Tarly and Bran Stark discovered that Rhaegar Targaryen had lawfully married Lyanna Stark, making Jon not a bastard, but Aegon Targaryen, a true-born son of the dragon. The secret carried the weight of kingdoms. If it became known, Daenerys would no longer be the only claimant with Targaryen blood. After the Night King was defeated, Daenerys returned to Dragonstone to begin the final campaign against Cersei Lannister. But the island that had once welcomed her home now became the site of another devastating loss. Rhaegal, wounded from the battle in the north, was struck from the sky by Euron Greyjoy's scorpions. He crashed into the sea before Daenerys could reach him. Missandei was captured in the attack and later executed before the walls of King's Landing. Grief and fury followed Daenerys back to the old fortress. In its chambers, Varys began to doubt her. He believed Jon would be the better ruler, and he sought to place the realm in another pair of hands. Daenerys answered betrayal with fire. On the shore of Dragonstone, Drogon burned Varys alive while the others watched in silence. The castle had witnessed the return of House Targaryen, but it also witnessed the fracture of the Queen's closest council. Soon afterward, Daenerys left Dragonstone for the last time. She flew to King's Landing and won the city, not with restraint, but with dragonfire. The bells rang in surrender, yet the burning continued. The dream of restoration gave way to terror. The woman who had come to the ancestral island, seeking a home, had become isolated from nearly everyone who had followed her there. After Daenerys died in the ruined throne room, Dragonstone passed once more into uncertainty. Its black walls endured, as they always had. Aegon had planned his conquest there. Stannis had waited there. Daenerys had returned there with living dragons. Again and again, the island stood at the edge of great change, a fortress of fire and stone facing the narrow sea. Dragonstone was never merely a castle. It was the surviving piece of old Valyria in Westeros, a monument to a family that had escaped one apocalypse and helped shape the world that followed. Its towers remained twisted like stone dragons, its caves still glittered with dragonglass, and the Dragonmont still breathed smoke into the sky. Even after the last dragon flew away, the island remained what it had always been, a lonely stronghold where the past waited beneath the black volcanic rock.